Chapter 207. The alliance of the Shadow Sting Army was not necessarily all well-intentioned. In Kunlun City it meant unknown dangers. Good and evil often meant different positions and schemes. Swords and sabers, mutual deception, and intrigues all appeared in the separation and reunion. Under the general trend where the invincible realm experts were like non-entities or weeds, only the most powerful self was the most trustworthy. Li Tianlan had understood this a long time ago. But he was still a little unaccustomed to wandering in the storm, witnessing and even experiencing all this. After coming out of the primeval forest on the border, he needed to adapt to more than just the outside world. He also needed to explore and familiarize himself with everything in the dark world. In a sense, adapting to the latter was even more significant and important than adapting to the former. This was his destined path in the future. For the rest of his life, everything in the dark world was destined to be the main melody of his life. The sudden storm, the thunder in the silent place, the unknown deceit, and the killing intent behind the smiling faces. He had to wander in this circle where there was no good or evil, no morality, and only a pure standpoint to distinguish between the enemy and the friend. Whether he sang all the way or kept a low profile, he had to figure out the essence through appearances, advance step by step, carry the Holy Family on his back as if walking on thin ice, and attack the peak of the dark world. The word life was too heavy. In his magnificent life, which seemed to take for granted, the unspeakable tiredness and hardships were the important cornerstones that supported the Li family's future glory. This was the general trend and so was the destiny. Wang Zhaoyang of the Shadow Sting Army had gone far away. Li Tianlan's eyes were deep. He looked at his gradually blurring figure and was silent for a long time. He was looking at Wang Zhaoyang. Behind him, Deep Dream was watching him. At this moment, Li Tianlan seemed different from before. The ethereal sense of reality seemed to gradually disappear from him. He stood there quietly, but his whole person seemed distant and heavy, restrained. All of his sharpness, emotions, and everything else were restrained to the extreme, and there was a faint sense of danger in his composure. Deep Dream looked at Li Tianlan in a daze and sighed softly. Sai City was not large and there were not many top assassins in it, but every one of them was a famous figure in the dark world. Their strength was beyond doubt, and their cohesiveness was also well known. This was a power that seemed mysterious to the outside world, but internally, it did not place much importance on seniority. Deep Dream, Sunset Shadow, Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, and several other assassins. They would be respectful when facing tribulation and Situ Tsangyue, the city lord. But deep down they did not feel that they were really unattainable. Whether it was the King of Shadow or the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, they were all very close and within reach. That feeling, it was like they were one. Whatever they wanted to do, the city lord would do it for them. Whatever the city lord wanted to do, they would go through water and tread on fire for him. Since the establishment of Sai City, with the addition of one top assassin after another, it seemed that no one had ever cared about the goal and purpose of Sai City. And it seemed that Sai City didn't care about these things at all. This force existed aimlessly and almost aloof from the world. It seemed to be ignorant, but it had a special meaning in the hearts of the assassins. They were assassins and killers. In the darkest corner, they released their killing intent in the purest way. When the killing intent dissipated, they chose to go home. Killers had no home? What a joke. The world of ice and snow on Mount Taibai was the most sacred pure land in the hearts of everyone in Sai City. This was Sai City, a city of assassins with no internal rules, no purpose, no goals, and no hierarchy. It was an independent but closely united city of assassins. It was a force blooming with warmth in a mysterious and cold corner. Therefore, when Situ Tsangyue the Castellan announced that Li Tianlan would be the young governor of Sai City, every top assassin showed their support without hesitation. They did not bother to think about what this meant. Because all this was what Situ Tsangyue wanted to do, they would support her. Just like in the past, Situ Tsangyue would also support what they wanted to do. No matter how complicated things were inside Sai City, they could be simplified to the simple logic that if someone wanted to do it, then they would do it. Looking at Li Tianlan's back, Deep Dream had a complicated look in her eyes. She did not know how much the 19-year-old young man in front of her was shouldering, but she knew that this young city lord was not destined to be as simple and thorough as Sai City. The complexity and entanglement in his heart had long turned into obsession and penetrated deep into his bones. Instead of being purified, the whole Sai City would undergo some unexpected changes with his joining. As the top assassins of Sai City who had been active in the outside world in recent years, Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow both knew very well that this kind of change was not what the overall will of Sai City liked. In Li Tianlan's hands, Sai City would definitely become different. But for the first time in many years, Situt Songyue wanted to do something. In any case, they had no reason not to support her. No matter what she wanted to do. Young master, the goal of the Wang family of Beihai should be intelligence. When you mentioned intelligence just now, there was something wrong with Wang Zhaoyang? After a moment of silence, Deep Dream suppressed the messy thoughts in her heart and said softly. Li Tianlan was now the young city lord supported by the whole Sai City. No matter what would happen in the future, since she had made a choice, Deep Dream must consider things from Li Tianlan's standpoint. Li Tianlan nodded. When Wang Zhaoyang proposed to share intelligence, he felt that something was wrong, so he mentioned it tentatively. At that time, although Wang Zhaoyang hid it well, he still exposed something unusual. But what did it mean? It was obvious that the Wang family of Beihai had noticed the special channel of Samsara, but Li Tianlan was not sure whether it was the mysterious ally around Samsara that the Wang family of Beihai had noticed, or whether they just wanted to investigate the truth of Samsara's intelligence agency through some clues. The land of East Island was extremely sensitive to Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai, and all the superpowers in the West. Now that the Wang family of Beihai had noticed it, the so-called kindness that Wang Zhaoyang showed today was likely to turn into naked hostility in the next second. Every one of these forces is simple. Even if they smile at you, they can make you uncomfortable. Li Tianlan laughed at himself, turned around and went down the mountain. Let's go back. Deep Dream followed Li Tianlan closely. She was indeed a beauty. At the most mature age, her every move was enchanting and seductive. The faint smell of perfume surrounded her. Quietly, Deep Dream's voice became softer and more charming. Walking beside Li Tianlan, she said softly, "There are too many schemes in the dark world, and the murderous intent is too strong. This is a fact that can't be changed. Most of the fights can't be handled by ordinary people. Although we are assassins, we have always been very pure. Killing is killing, and we basically stay as far away from some intrigues as possible." She paused and seemed to hesitate, but she still said in a charming tone and giggled, "Of course we're not so clean. But in the past few years I've been traveling outside and I have a lot of experience in how to avoid disputes after killing people. Young master, do you need Deep Dream to share with you?" Li Tianlan's steps seemed to stiffen, but he immediately returned to normal. His expression was calm, but his eyes grew deeper and deeper. He gave Deep Dream a meaningful look. In the other party's somewhat flustered expression, he suddenly smiled leisurely and said, "Do you know what I was thinking just now?" Deep Dream uttered a syllable in confusion, but her heart was in a mess. She kept thinking about the meaning in Li Tianlan's eyes when he looked at her. What she said just now could not be called a warning, but it could be said to be an exhortation, and it also contained a little longing in her heart. However, she was a woman and a very beautiful woman. Testing Li Tianlan with such a gentle and charming tone should not arouse his disgust. But somehow she always felt a little uneasy in her heart. "I was just thinking," Li Tianlan chuckled and said, "in the future most of our enemies or friends will come from the dark world, from the major forces in the dark world such as the Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City, some foreign behemoths, or some domestic special agencies. This circle is very complicated, so complicated that no matter whether you are brilliant or ordinary, as long as you enter this circle, everyone has to struggle carefully to survive. Even someone as strong as Wang Tianzong, who ranks first on the divine list, has to be cautious when leading the entire Wang family of Beihai. Force and wisdom, conspiracy and betrayal, survival and death, war and standpoint, this circle that includes everything is too big and too complicated. Deep Dream, in such an environment, can anyone really stand aloof from the world?" Deep Dream forced a smile and her face seemed a little pale. In this world, nothing can represent everything. What can guarantee survival is not even force and wisdom, but prudence. This is the dark world in my heart. Li Tianlan slowly walked over the land under his feet. His tone was neither indifferent nor passionate, but there was an indelible depression in his calmness. "This is also my path. Wang Zhaoyang and I formed an alliance so I would subconsciously think about his deeper purpose. He reminded me to be careful of Kunlun City so I would think about Samsara Palace, the trump card of Kunlun City, and the mentality of the Wang family of Beihai. So I suddenly thought of a very interesting question. In this cruel and dark world, I am destined to meet different people and different conspiracies in the future. What will I be like in 10 or 20 years? His voice became lower and lower, and the brilliance in his eyes became more restrained. A heavenly son? An ambitious man? Or a pile of bones? I won't be a pile of bones. Deep Dream opened her mouth subconsciously, and her tone was firm. Li Qianlan's words seemed to be full of emotion. Deep Dream didn't know if she was thinking too much. But she had just tested Li Qianlan, and now she heard these words. She had to take them as Li Qianlan's answer to her. At this point, Deep Dream had to make a clear statement. Although Li Qianlan's words were flat, she could feel the increasing pressure in them. If Deep Dream had seen Li Qianlan's calmness and emptiness, as well as his solemnity and sharpness, then on such a sunny morning, she clearly felt the gloominess in the depths of Li Qianlan's heart that was like a needle hidden in silk floss. Her test just now was nothing more than to express that Sai City still liked the previous attitude of standing aloof from the world. But Li Qianlan talked about his attitude that he was destined to be unable to stay away from disputes in the future. Deep Dream didn't know what would happen if she insisted on her opinion. But when she thought of Li Qianlan's meaningful eyes just now, she felt a little cold in her heart. At this moment, Deep Dream was in a trance. If this temperamental young governor joined Sai City and was destined to change the city of assassins, then what she had just said might make her the main force to change Sai City. But Deep Dream had no choice. As long as Sai City is there, no one dares to hurt young master. No one in Sai City will agree. Deep Dream said calmly. Li Qianlan glanced at her with a smile and said lightly, "Really?" Deep Dream's heart grew colder, and she said in a slightly bitter tone, "Time will prove everything." "Yes, time will tell." Li Qianlan nodded. "I can't give you a clear answer. Perhaps only time will tell each and every one of us the answer. But I can tell you that everything I've worked so hard since I was young is so that my family and friends can be free and happy." Deep Dream was slightly stunned. She had never expected that behind the young master's gloomy and almost murderous answer, she would finally get such an answer. "So that my family and friends can be free and happy? What is freedom?" Li Qianlan walked down the slope. He looked up at the sky. As far as the eye could see, white clouds were drifting in the sky and passing through the sunlight, changing constantly. Freedom. Of course, it means doing whatever you want. Deep Dream thought seriously for a while and then said softly, "No." Li Qianlan shook his head calmly. At this moment, there was an inexplicable brilliance in his eyes. He chuckled and said calmly, "In my opinion, the so-called freedom means not doing what you don't want to do." Deep Dream was thoughtful. This answer seemed to be the same as his whole person. He was reserved but wild at the same time. "Tell me the secret news you've heard." Li Qianlan stopped and simply lay on the grass. Looking up at the blue sky and white clouds above, his tone gradually became faint. "What are the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City plotting? It's not a plot. It can be said that they're working together to promote something." Deep Dream thought about it seriously. The former Sai City did have the demeanor of an individual immortal who lived in the mortal world but ignored the secular world. He basically didn't care about the affairs between the superpowers and the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. Although he had heard some news at the beginning, he didn't think about it at all. "At that time I had just returned to Mount Taibai from Snow Country. Gu Qianchuan and Wang Jingwei came to Sai City together. They seemed to want your highness to support one of their proposals. These two families seem to be preparing to improve the special warfare system's voice in Zhongzhou State." This news was not much different from nothing. Li Qianlan shook his head and asked casually, "Who is Wang Jingwei?" "The head of the military staff department." Deep Dream simply said, "One of the core figures of the Wang family of Beihai." Li Qianlan's pupils contracted slightly. The head of the military staff department, which ranked first in the four headquarters of Zhongzhou State, was a real power figure in the entire military world, even the most powerful one. In his chat with Ning Qianqing, Li Qianlan also knew that Ning Qianqing's father, Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations, was most eager for this position. Although the two were at the same level, the former was the fastest way to be promoted to the rank of marshal. Such a powerful figure in the military world and the second in command of Kunlun City went to Mount Taibai in an attempt to promote the special warfare system's voice in Zhongzhou State. How did the specific plan work? And what did it have to do with him? It said that Kunlun City had this kind of movement many years ago, but it didn't pass at that time. At that time, the strongest opposition was from the Wang family of Beihai. Now it seems that the Wang family of Beihai has relented. Deep Dream shook her head. She didn't know what the specific plan was, but at that time, Sidut Sanyue said some harsh words, which mentioned the Li family, and finally refused the request of the Wang family of Beihai in Kunlun City. It could be seen that even if the Li family didn't account for the whole reason, it was at least a very important part of the reason. Now seeing Li Qianlan, Deep Dream was more and more convinced of her speculation. Recently, the muscles at the corners of Li Tianlan's eyes twitched. He thought for a while and said, "When exactly? At the end of May and the beginning of June? I forget the exact time." Deep Dream seemed a little embarrassed. "I don't pay much attention to the domestic affairs of Zhongzhou State. I stayed in Mount Taibai for less than a day before I went to Billi State." Li Tianlan fell silent. The period from the end of May to the beginning of June happened to be around the time when he met Wang Tianzong for the first time in Huading. Did it have anything to do with each other? "It's okay." He was silent for a while and said lightly, "The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City joined hands to promote the status of the special warfare system in Zhongzhou State, which was a good thing for anyone in the special warfare system." Although Deep Dream speculated that there was a reason for this to target the Li family, at least so far, Li Tianlan couldn't see the harm of this matter to the Li family. Moreover, this matter was destined to happen after the final battle of Changdao. When he returned to Zhongzhou State, it wouldn't be too late to sit back and watch the ups and downs inside Zhongzhou State. At least in this final battle, the proposal jointly promoted by the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City has little to do with us," he said slowly. "Yes." Deep Dream nodded. "At present, the most important thing to guard against is Kunlun City. Wang Zhaoyang's reminder is very meaningful. Young master, if Kunlun City has a backup plan in East Island, what do you think it will be?" "How would I know?" Li Tianlan smiled, but there was no smile in his clear and gentle eyes. "I only care about what they want to do now." Looking closely at the list of people Kunlun City had invested in East Island, the weirdness was almost obvious. They had indeed invested too little power. As the promoter of this plan, if they only relied on this list, it would be difficult to get the approval of the high-level officials, and many special warfare agencies of the empire would be dissatisfied. Such a small investment was not worthy of the position of the power center of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Wang Zhaoyang's reminder was timely and in line with common sense. Under normal circumstances, it was normal for Kunlun City to invest more power than the Wang family of Beihai and Sai City in this national plot. But at least for now, everything in Kunlun City was very normal. If they invested more than the Wang family of Beihai and Sai City, what resources could they invest in secretly? And what would these resources, which had not seen the light of day, do after his identity as the successor of the Li family was exposed? Li Tianlan pressed his lips tightly, and his eyes were cruel and cold. If this reminder came from Samsara and Wang Zhaoyang didn't explain it, it could only prove that Samsara still hadn't caught the resources that Kunlun City had secretly invested in East Island. If they want to hide it from everyone and invest secretly, at least they can't be too conspicuous. They can only invest a small number of artifacts, people, or intelligence. What can Kunlun City invest? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself. Intelligence is impossible. Deep Dream shook her head directly. Because of the Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City's development in East Island is not smooth, and they can't get useful intelligence. As for artifacts, Kunlun City doesn't have murderous weapons, and it's not as good as the Dongqing clan and the Wang family of Beihai in making weapons. It's also impossible. So, it's people? Li Tianlan said softly. People? Several experts of Kunlun City went to Northern Europe with Gu Qianchuan, and some stayed in Zhongzhou State. Although the experts in their headquarters are mysterious, there won't be many real experts. In the whole Kunlun City, only Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan are barely men. Others can't affect the overall situation. Before Deep Dream finished, Li Tianlan suddenly stood up. Men? He looked at Deep Dream with burning eyes, and his eyes were getting brighter and brighter. At this moment, for no reason, he suddenly thought of his first meeting with Gong Sun Chi. At the same time, he thought of the Dongqing clan's reminder. Gong Sun Chi had said that there was a young man in Zhongzhou State who was going to participate in the plot against East Island, but he was stopped. And the person who stopped the young man had already arrived in East Island. Gong Sun Chi told him to be careful. The Dongqing clan reminded him to be careful of Phoenix Pavilion. Wang Zhaoyang also reminded him to be careful. Jiang Shangyu told him that Phoenix Pavilion had close ties with Kunlun City. Deep Dream said that only Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan were barely men in Kunlun City. Then, what if it was a woman? Li Tianlan's heart beat wildly. He felt as if he had caught something, but something was missing. Deep Dream. He looked at Deep Dream and said solemnly, "Have you heard of Phoenix Pavilion?" Chapter 208. The voice was very close, but it seemed to be suppressed very low, sounding in Li Tianlan's ears with a little coldness and resentment. It was supposed to be a clear and sexy voice, but the tone was as cold as the wind in hell. Li Tianlan turned his head sharply. Less than 10 meters behind him, a sexy and plump figure stood there quietly, looking at Li Tianlan calmly. A strange look flashed in Li Tianlan's eyes. The woman in front of him was a wonderful beauty in all aspects. She was about 1.7 meters tall, with a plump and well-proportioned figure. The tight white suit lightly clung to her body, and her breasts, waist and hips were vividly displayed under the suit. The skirt of the suit was very short, and a pair of white, delicate and slender legs were exposed in the morning sun, seeming to shine with an intoxicating soft luster. She wore a pair of high-heeled shoes nearly 10 centimeters high, which made her legs look more straight and attractive. This was a woman who looked about 26 or 27 years old. She had just the right facial features and a little makeup, which gave her a very amazing charm. The soft wind blew some of her long hair, and the woman naturally reached out her hand to comb it. The corners of her mouth rose into a charming and delicate smile. For a moment, Li Tianlan couldn't describe whether the woman was amorous or something else, because under her seductive attire and charming smile, her temperament was always arrogant, even holy. This was a woman Li Tianlan was no stranger to. He had seen her sharpness and strength, her weakness and hardship, and her helplessness and persistence. But this morning he saw her charm and arrogance. Li Tianlan hadn't paid much attention to her. He had met her a few times before, and he always felt that everything about her was a facade. No matter what posture she showed, there seemed to be only numbness and dead silence in her eyes, as if this was her essence. Li Tianlan opened his mouth and forgot her specific name for a moment, so he could only vaguely say, "Senior Sister Du? My name is Du Hanin." The woman chuckled, and her clear voice became more and more delicate. It had to be said that the temperament she showed was really unique. She was proud and charming at the same time, which could easily arouse a man's desire to conquer. However, Li Tianlan was basically immune to this kind of charm now. It was not that he was aloof, but his current state seemed to be really like what Li Beidian said, a tragedy. His starting point in terms of women was really too high. He had Qin Weibai and stripped the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. Now he also had a stunning fiancée by his side. Although Du Hanin was also a real beauty, he somewhat looked down on her. Du Hanin. Li Tianlan nodded. He really didn't pay much attention to this senior student who stayed in the Sky Academy. His more vivid impression was that in the entrance maneuver, when he was escaping from Lu Xiaowei, the former deputy director of the teaching office of the Sky Academy, Du Hanin successfully injured Li Beidian with a small team that was not very good. Then she tied with Wang Yuetong in the first actual combat lesson. Du Hanin seemed to be valued by the enchantress of the Wang family of Beihai. It was because of the intervention of the enchantress that Wang Yuetong, Li Beidian and others did not pursue the matter of the sneak attack in the entrance maneuver. As for other impressions, he had no. Moreover, Qin Weibai specially prepared a list of key teachers and students of the Sky Academy for him, and Du Hanin's name was not included on the list. Therefore, although they could be regarded as classmates, Li Tianlan did not have a deep impression of her. He had never thought that Du Hanin would know about Phoenix Pavilion. Li Tianlan was instinctively wary of such an unknown force. Jiang Shangyu's biggest motive for wanting to kill him was because of someone in Phoenix Pavilion. Li Tianlan did not know what relationship he had with that person, but at least in Jiang Shangyu's heart, that person thought that he had something to do with him, or at least they were likely to cross paths in the future. Moreover, the reminder of the Dongqing clan, especially the kind of reminder that was difficult to speak of, seemed to explain the problem. Especially when he talked about Phoenix Pavilion with Qin Weibai, Qin Weibai's look was obviously a little strange. All of this showed that Phoenix Pavilion was absolutely not simple. Was Phoenix Pavilion the secret investment of Kunlun City in East Island this time? Jiang Shangyu's killing intent, Gong Sunqi's warning, the Dongqing clan's difficult to speak of, and Wang Zhaoyang's reminder. All of this seemed to be traceable, but Li Tianlan always felt that some very key clues were missing. He pondered, looked at Du Hanin in front of him very gently and said softly, "Senior sister, do you know Phoenix Pavilion?" "I don't know. But I've heard that it has something to do with Kunlun City." Du Hanin shook her head and raised her delicate eyebrows as if she was hesitating. "Who told you that?" Li Tianlan asked directly. Kunlun City had been established for 20 years, but few people knew about Phoenix Pavilion, which was related to it. This was not a normal phenomenon at all. "Enemies." Du Hanin's tone was strange and there was a faint killing intent in the air. She could see Li Tianlan's solemnity now, but in the end she sighed. I know about Phoenix Pavilion, but I've just heard someone mention it. I don't know much more than you, young governor. Li Tianlan frowned and said directly, Senior sister, can you tell me more about it? Du Hanyin did not speak, nor did she approach him. She had been standing where she was, keeping a subtle distance from Li Tianlan. They seemed to be chatting with each other, but there was also a sense of confrontation between them. This senior sister, who was a stunner in both appearance and temperament, had obviously dressed up today. She had spoken softly and kept a low posture. But at this moment, after a short hesitation, Li Tianlan clearly noticed that the look in her eyes had changed. It was a kind of scrutinizing gaze, examining him, the young master of Sai City, as if she wanted to confirm something. Li Tianlan waited quietly without saying a word. He was so quiet that there was no sharpness or aura, and he was extremely restrained. About 6 months ago, Du Hanyin finally spoke, and her clear voice became a little dry. I was attacked when I was on a mission in the northwest of Zhongzhou State. At that time, I fled for nearly 300 miles before I escaped. The main reason was that they wanted to capture me alive and didn't kill me. They were 2 experts at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, belonging to a core subordinate agency of Kunlun City. When I was seriously injured, they mentioned Phoenix Pavilion. Du Hanyin paused, recalled it carefully, and then said slowly, at that time, their original words were, since you are so good at serving men, we might as well send you to Phoenix Pavilion. I think many people are interested in having a taste of the first miss of the Du family. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his eyebrows. Serving men? Phoenix Pavilion? Thoughts surged in his mind. Looking at the graceful Du Hanyin in front of him in a white suit, his eyes instinctively became a little strange. Don't look at me like that. Du Hanyin suddenly smiled charmingly. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes, which had always looked numb, were a little sad. I'm really good at serving men. I think I'm talented in this respect, right? In the Sky Academy, I've had 9 men in more than a year. From the first one to the last one, none of the men who used me said anything bad about me. She gently licked her delicate red lips with her pink tongue. Her eyes were like silk, but there was a kind of almost crazy sadness and despair in them. It was the pain and sadness of a newly healed scar being forcibly opened. There was an unforgettable madness in her calmness. Du Hanyin looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and said with a sweet smile, Junior brother, do you want to have a taste of me? You can do whatever you want. Li Tianlan's expression didn't change at all, but his eyes became deeper. It was a pair of extremely deep eyes, like a starry sky or an abyss, with a kind of vast and silent power. In this pair of eyes, Du Hanyin saw neither lust nor contempt. Only calmness. Senior sister, you must have some difficulties, right? Li Tianlan suddenly said. Du Hanyin bit her lip hard and stubbornly looked at Li Tianlan without saying a word. She had thought that her soul and body had long been numb, and that the nightmarish humiliating scenes of the past had already faded away. But in front of this pair of young but deep eyes, Du Hanyin was surprised to find that she was trembling. All the humiliation and despair of the past were wildly transmitted to every corner of her body. Her vision gradually blurred. She just clenched her trembling fists, bit her lip, and tried to maintain her calmness and pride, as well as the so-called charm that she hated most. Li Tianlan took out a cigarette and lit it, lost in thought. At this moment he suddenly thought of himself. Not the present self, but the self before he entered the secular world. At that time he was also a young master, the young master of the Li family. He took a deep drag on the cigarette and laughed at himself. Those who had not struggled in a desperate situation would never understand the helplessness and stubbornness of always wanting to fight in despair, nor would they feel the madness and resentment after seeing a little hope. The road of life had never been smooth. In the bumpy road, people would advance and retreat, fall, get injured and bleed. Some people might give up everything in the process of moving forward, but as long as they were still persevering, there would be a reason in their hearts to persevere to the end. Li Tianlan was like that. So was Du Hanyin. The Du family in the northwest. Deep Dream opened her mouth softly, looked at Du Hanyin, and said in a complicated tone, Are you the first miss of the Du family? Du Hanyin nodded, then shook her head and laughed at herself. There is no Du family in the northwest. There is no first Mississippi. Just a wandering ghost. Li Tianlan looked at Deep Dream. In front of Du Hanyin, he did not hide anything and asked straightforwardly, What's going on with the Du family? Deep Dream looked at Du Hanyin. In the other party's silence, she shook her head and said, The Du family in the northwest was originally a first-line wealthy family in Zhongzhou State, even stronger. It was deeply rooted in the northwest of Zhongzhou State and had great influence. Du Yuanshan, the head of the family, was also one of the few experts of the half-step invincible realm in Zhongzhou State. But since Du Yuanshan failed to compete with Jiang Shan of the Jiang family for the position of General of 9 regions, the Du family began to go downhill. First, there was internal strife, then Du Yuanshan was assassinated, and the Du family was wiped out by the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group in the chaos. There was no fluctuation in Deep Dream's voice. She just told the story she knew in a normal way. There may be some secrets, but Sai City doesn't pay much attention to them and hasn't investigated them much. The collapse of the Du family was spectacular, and the whole Zhongzhou state was in an uproar. Although Deep Dream didn't pay attention to these things, it didn't mean that she was stupid. She didn't bother to think about it before, but now that Li Tianlan became their young governor and began to contact the Du family, she could roughly speculate something after thinking about it, but she was not sure. The Du family was destroyed about 3 years ago, and Du Yuanshan was assassinated earlier. He was also one of the top 10 experts in Zhongzhou State. He was very close to the academics and was one of the super experts of the academics. At that time, there was a rumor that after he failed to compete with Jiang Shan for the position of General of 9 regions, the academics had planned to transfer Du Yuanshan to Huading and replace Zhuang Huayang as the headmaster of the Sky Academy, but before she finished speaking, Li Tianlan had already understood what she meant. The academics could now be said to be a group standing on the commanding heights of Zhongzhou State. But it was not the case more than 3 years ago. That should be the most sensitive period for the academics to attack the commanding heights. The general trend of Zhongzhou State was controlled by the Prince Group, and the most prominent authority of Zhongzhou State was at the time when the new replaced the old. Was the destruction of the Du family a big move carried out by the Prince Group in conjunction with the Special Warfare Group when it withdrew from the commanding heights of power? If it covered the entire northwest region of Zhongzhou State, then it was indeed a big move. Li Tianlan sneered and his eyes were cold. The Prince Group, the behemoth of Zhongzhou State, was really accompanied by blood before it rose up and down. The destruction of the Du family undoubtedly helped the Jiang family in Beijiang and Jiang Shangyu's family. But Li Tianlan couldn't figure out why the academics didn't stop it at that time. The academics was extremely weak in the special warfare system. As a half-step invincible realm expert, Du Yuanshan was definitely one of the most important figures of the academics. Besides, the Du family was a real wealthy family. How could it be destroyed so easily? Even if Du Yuanshan was assassinated, they should have shown an attitude of protection. For Li Tianlan, this was definitely not a historical problem. Although he was now the young governor of Sai City, he had temporarily joined the academics and would be the representative of the academics in the special warfare system in the future. Inevitably, what happened to the Du family would make Li Tianlan feel puzzled. He wanted to know the attitude of the academics toward him at the critical moment. During the period when the Du family was destroyed, Li Huaqing, the leader of the academics, was about to take the last step. But Li Tianlan didn't believe that the academics at that time really had no time to take care of other things. What was the attitude of the academics at that time? Li Tianlan looked at Du Hanin and asked. It was impossible for an individual immortal like Deep Dream to know the answer to this kind of question. As the person involved, Du Hanin should know better. What attitude could they have? Du Hanin said coldly, the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group took action at the same time, and other groups also got benefits. How could the academics have a clear attitude during that sensitive period? Young governor, don't you have an engagement with the Dongqing clan? One of the benefits that the giant group got was that Mrs. Dongqing by Qingqian could become the governor of Qinzhou. What's more, the academics didn't get nothing. Although the Du family is gone, they have been operating in the Northwest in recent years. They gave up the right to speak in the Northwest Special Warfare System and got more in other aspects. A few months ago, Governor Bai went to Guangdong from Qinzhou, and Qinzhou province also fell into their control. Oh, the rise and fall of wealthy families? In the eyes of those bigwigs, it's just a pure transaction. The rise and fall of wealthy families was just a transaction. In the general trend, the wealthy families were nothing more than pawns. Li Tianlan's eyes were clear. He looked at Du Hanin in front of him and asked, "Do you hate me?" Obviously, the destruction of the Du family had also destroyed Du Hanin's life. The daughter of a wealthy family who had an extraordinary status in the Sky Academy had become what? In more than a year she had had 9 men. In a desperate situation, women often had to face greater humiliation than men. What do you think? Du Hanin said blandly, in the last Sky Academy I was one of the strongest, and I also had a place among the top 10 experts of the young generation. My brother, my fiancé, and I wanted to win the Sky Academy and revive the reputation of the Du family, but what happened? My fiancé killed my brother for the sake of his future. I originally had the wind vein, but it was also destroyed by him. My strength fell from the fire-flaming realm to the ice-condensing realm. I failed 8 out of 12 tasks and my credits became negative once. In order to get the most basic dozens of credits a month, I had to take the initiative to seduce some powerful men. If you were me, would you hate me? So you came to me today, Li Tianlan said with a smile. Do you want to avenge you with the help of Sai City? He was not surprised by Du Hanin's choice. It might not be a good choice, but as long as she wanted revenge, it was Du Hanin's only choice. Du Hanin's own hatred was easy to deal with. No matter how strong her fiancé who had betrayed her, was, after all, a student of the last session, and would not achieve much for the time being. But the target of the Du family's hatred was Kunlun City and the Prince Group. From this point of view, Li Tianlan's goal was the same as hers. After his identity was exposed and he became the young master of Sai City, it was reasonable for Du Hanin to come to him. At least in the entire Zhongzhou state, there was really an irreconcilable hatred with Kunlun City, and he was the only one who might have the strength, power, and potential to take revenge in the future. Although the enchantress of the Wang family of Beihai liked Du Hanin, it was mostly out of personal sympathy. It was impossible for the Wang family of Beihai, a behemoth, to fight against Kunlun City for Du Hanin. Not to mention that the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City were secretly planning something. Even if there was nothing fishy between them, Du Hanin herself was not worth the Wang family of Beihai's help. I want to join Sai City, follow you, and sharpen my martial arts. Du Hanin looked straight at Li Tianlan. As for revenge, we have the same enemy. Indeed. Li Tianlan nodded. But why should I promise you? I have a grudge against Kunlun City, but it doesn't mean that I want to draw everyone who has a grudge against Kunlun City to Sai City. Whether I'm the young governor or Li Tianlan, I'm on the weaker side now. If I take you in, I have to take risks. So, although it's hard to hear, I have to say that whether it's for self-protection now or revenge in the future, I won't keep useless people around me. I have my value. Du Hanin was not embarrassed or flustered. Her clear voice was steady and full of confidence. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and remained calm. First of all, my identity. Although the Du family has been destroyed, there are still some uncles who are willing to help me. They can't do anything in the Sky Academy, but outside the Sky Academy, they are very valuable assets. Especially if I can join Sai City, the effect of this network will be more obvious. The Du family's influence is concentrated in the Northwest. If young master wants to establish his own foundation in the Northwest after graduation, my network can play a great role. Du Hanin's voice grew more and more shocked. She looked at Li Tianlan seriously and continued, as long as young master's performance is amazing enough, it's not impossible for you to set up a group in the future. Li Tianlan's face did not change, but he was thinking seriously. Setting up a group was too far away for him to think about it. He was even hesitating about where to set up his own foundation. At present, the foundation of East Emperor Palace was naturally in Huading, but Huading was destined not to become Li Tianlan's backyard in a short time. If there were general trends converging inside Zhongzhou State, then Huading, which was the focus of all the major groups, would naturally be the focus. With Samsara Palace drifting away from him, it was impossible for him to control Huading alone with Sai City. On this matter, the academics' attitude would even be vague. It was already the best situation to set up a foundation in an area of Huading and seek development in the game of all the major forces. Li Tianlan's vision could not be limited to Huading, but the current situation was that besides Huading, where should he go to develop had become a big problem. Whether it was Taoist Xian Xuanzi instructing him to go to Wuyue or Metaphysics Grandmaster Great Master Wu Wei advising him to go to Jiangzhe, they were all the territory of the Southeast Group. If he acted rashly, he would only be attacked by the Wang family of Beihai. As for the Northeast, as the young governor of Sai City, it was impossible for him to compete with Sai City. The Southwest was occupied by the Prince Group. The South was the top priority of the Special Warfare Group's development in recent years. As for the Northwest, from the perspective of the Special Warfare System, it could almost be regarded as the base camp of Kunlun City. But from the overall perspective, the power of the academics was also not weak. It was indeed a good choice to use the political power of the academics in the Northwest to defeat Kunlun City in the Special Warfare System, which meant it was easier to get the support of the academics. But it was tantamount to fighting with Kunlun City head-on. What was most needed was strength. After 3 years in the Sky Academy, if Li Tianlan could reach the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, he would not hesitate to go to the northwest. But Li Tianlan himself also knew that it was not realistic to reach the peak of the thunder-shocking realm in 3 years. Li Tianlan shook his head. The speed at which he improved his strength now completely affected his future path. He did not want to think too much about this problem for the time being. But Du Hannin's statement did prove her value. It might not be a big deal for the Wang family of Beihai, but it was very important for him. Go on. He lowered his eyelids and said lightly, "My body." There was unspeakable cruelty and determination in Du Hannin's sexy voice. "I think I'm pretty and I'm not only good at serving men, but also seducing them. As long as I can get revenge, I'm willing to pay anything. If you want, young master, I'm also willing to set up a Phoenix Pavilion that belongs to you." Phoenix Pavilion. Li Tianlan had not figured out the situation of this organization so far, but according to the clues provided by Du Hannin, he knew some of the functions of Phoenix Pavilion. No matter how mysterious this organization was, at least one of its functions was to serve men. If that was all, Li Tianlan did not think this organization could pose any threat to him in this battle of Changdao. He was silent, waiting for Du Hannin to continue. "And my combat capability." Du Hannin gently stretched out her hand. On her slender white fingers, a flame suddenly appeared. It was a very subtle flame, but the air around it twisted with a bang. The temperature was so hot that in the twisted air, Du Hannin's body seemed to become blurred. The flame gradually expanded. At this moment, Du Hannin was dazzling in the flame like a phoenix reborn from the fire. Her whole body showed a kind of powerful aura that even moved Li Tianlan. Deep Dream's expression changed slightly. He seemed to be in disbelief as he said, "After your wind vein was crippled, it recovered?" "It's not a recovery but a mutation because this wind vein is stronger than before," Du Hannin said slowly. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, and his eyes gradually became serious. "I used to be in the fire-flaming realm. Although I fell to the ice-condensing realm, with the mutation of the wind vein, my strength also returned to the peak. Young master, give me time. I won't lose to anyone." In the flame, Du Hannin's eyes were clear and bright, and all the numbness was fading. That was her value. "Young master, Tribulation may be very interested in her," Deep Dream said in a serious tone. Tribulation was the only super assassin with double wind veins in the dark world. He would definitely study the mutated wind vein. Li Tianlan was silent. After a long time he said blandly, "You are valued by the enchantress of the Wang family of Beihai. I don't like it. In this battle of Changdao, I hope you can show an attitude." Du Hannin's face changed, but she finally nodded and said, "I understand." The phone suddenly rang. Deep Dream took out his cell phone and answered it. After saying a few words, he frowned and hung up. Young Master, Military Counselor and Gong Sun Chi signed the investigation order at the same time. They hope that Sai City can send elites to investigate other forces around the number 3 defensive zone. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City also received the same order. Deep Dream looked at Li Tianlan and asked, "Who should we send?" After the investigation, it meant that the final battle was imminent. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly. In the sun he stood up and said, "I'll go." Chapter 209. For any force except East Island, Changdao was not a suitable place for the final battle. It was no exaggeration to say that in Changdao, almost all the forces' advantages were suppressed to the lowest point. Only East Island, which had the home advantage, could be like a fish in water in this environment. Changdao was one of the most deserted cities in the whole East Island. This city had been bombed by nuclear weapons and had been a piece of scorched earth for a long time. Now, even if there were people here, they were quite sparsely populated. As for the area where the major forces were lurking, this space with a radius of 100 miles was even more unbelievably deserted. Now East Island had no way to retreat. So for the upcoming final battle, they showed a very determined attitude from the beginning. The Divine Wind Force signed the mobilization order immediately. The 3 giants, Liuhua Palace, Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace, fully supported them. The Kusanagi Force was fully activated. All the elite forces of the Special Warfare System of East Island were gathering toward Changdao. Changdao was sparsely populated. No matter how good the major forces were at hiding, they couldn't hide flawlessly in this empty environment. East Island basically didn't take much effort to locate the general positions of the major forces. Then, in the name of maneuver, it sent out troops and blocked the area with a radius of about 100 kilometers. There was no doubt that this was the battlefield of the final battle. The area with a radius of 100 kilometers was neither big nor small. There were 4 villages and 1 town here with a population of no more than thousands. When the evacuation order of East Island was issued, all the civilians had left as soon as possible. The whole battlefield, whether it was day or night, was as quiet as a ghost town. The night covered the sky. There was no moon tonight, and the misty and sparse starlight was reflected in the silent wilderness. The world was quiet and there was only the sound of insects around. A dark gray MPV was driving at a constant speed on the flat road. The vehicle did not turn on its lights and was only moving forward under the sparse starlight. In the hazy and dim light, the vehicle, which was not considered small, had a vague feeling of being in a trance. It looked creepy and strange. "Young master, we have to walk 2 kilometers ahead." In the passenger seat of the car, Deep Dream looked down at the screen in her hand and said calmly, "Is there a target ahead?" Li Tianlan had been looking out of the window quietly. When he heard Deep Dream's words, he turned his head directly. "There is a village about 12 kilometers ahead. The villagers have already been evacuated. It should be the gathering place of a certain force, most likely the force belonging to East Island. But I don't know what kind of organization it is." Deep Dream fiddled with the screen in her hand and shook her head. "The radar signal ahead is very strong. We can only sneak in and investigate on foot." Li Tianlan nodded. Now their car was painted with the paint of a stealth fighter. Coupled with some special car bodies, it was difficult to be discovered in the dark if one did not look carefully. Although this paint could shield the radar signal, it would be completely ineffective if the target was too close. After all, vehicles and fighter jets were different. A distance of more than 10 kilometers was nothing for a stealth fighter jet. If a stealth fighter jet could invade an area 10 kilometers away from the target, the destruction would be unimaginable. But the car could only move forward bit by bit. Even if they were painted with this precious paint, they could not really get close to the enemy's hinterland. Furthermore, their mission this time wasn't to fight. Reconnaissance was their main mission. Silently putting a cigarette to his mouth, Li Tianlan fumbled for a lighter on his body. He nodded and said vaguely, "Then go 2 kilometers ahead and sneak in on foot." Deep Dream nodded and continued to stare at the screen in her hand, saying nothing more. Li Tianlan fumbled for a long time but still couldn't find the lighter. He inadvertently turned his head and directly met a pair of quiet eyes that were as clear as water. The expression on the beautiful face was very soft, but the other party's eyes were staring at the cigarette in his mouth. "I can't smoke anymore." Dongqing Rushi shook her head. Holding the lighter in her small white hand, she said, "It will leave a smell. If there is an accident later, it will be inconvenient for us to retreat." Li Tianlan smiled and took the cigarette out of his mouth. After thinking for a while, he said, "With our lineup, it won't be a big problem." Zhongzhou State attached great importance to this reconnaissance mission. In each of the 3 defensive zones, 6 or 7 reconnaissance teams were sent with different numbers of people. Li Tianlan's team belonged to the number 3 defensive zone. It might not have the most people in each reconnaissance team, but its strength was the strongest. There were 5 people in their reconnaissance team: Deep Dream, Sunset Shadow, Li Tianlan, Du Hanin, and Dongqing Rushi. It was a standard configuration of a special warfare team, but its function was vague. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow were top assassins, and they were experts in both stealth and reconnaissance. Du Hanin had the Wind Vein, which made her a natural assassin. After the mutation of the Wind Vein, this senior sister, who had now joined Sai City, not only recovered her strength, but also went one step further. A 27-year-old expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm was enough to advance and retreat freely in most situations. As for Li Tianlan, his current strength might not be as good as Deep Dream and Sunset Shadows, but in terms of secretive body movements and speed, he was stronger than Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow. Shadow Formula, Desperate Chase, and Night Walking were all top body movement legacies in the Dark World. Now Li Tianlan had integrated the 3 unique skills. In terms of mobility, he could definitely be called the number 1 person in the young generation. There might be many people that Li Tianlan couldn't defeat now, but if he wanted to leave, there were not many people who could stop him. His safety in this reconnaissance mission could also be guaranteed. The only variable was Dongqing Rushi. This genius girl from Jade Pool majored in the 7 sword styles of Jade Pool: Flying Fairy Sword from Outer Heaven and Peerless Sword from Infinite Path. One style was an extremely sharp killing move, and the other was unparalleled domineering, which perfectly matched the sword intent of silence of the famous sword of Jade Pool. but it had nothing to do with stealth. Li Tianlan didn't intend to bring her here at first, but Dongqing Yueshan insisted on taking action with him. With Sunset Shadow and Deep Dream, this mission was basically foolproof. Li Tianlan thought about it and simply brought her here. However, he didn't expect that Dongqing Yueshan, who insisted on taking action with him, would fall silent halfway. Her main personality recovered, and the beautiful but innocent and adorable Dongqing Rushi appeared beside him. Looking at his fiancée's confused expression, Li Tianlan didn't know what he was thinking. "Don't worry, I'll protect you." Dongqing Rushi blinked her pure eyes, reached out to hold Li Tianlan's palm and said in a clear voice. That voice was very pleasant, very delicate, but with unwavering firmness. Li Tianlan smiled bitterly, took a deep look at her and said calmly, "Stay with me later." Dongqing Rushi said, "Oh," obediently, and subconsciously touched the quaint long sword beside her. The famous sword Silence. With this sword in hand, Dongqing Rushi was fully qualified to protect anyone. It was no exaggeration to say that if she was determined to die, she could become one of the strongest in the final battle of East Island. The invincible sword intent in the silence matched her perfectly. Once Dongqing Rushi pulled out the sword, it would be a real invincible strike. That sword strike at the cost of her life was so terrifying. Li Tianlan didn't want to think about it, and he didn't dare to think about it. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, looked at the silence beside Dongqing Rushi's hand and said nothing. The body of the silence was quaint, and the scabbard was densely covered with cracks. That day in Jingdu, Dongqing Rushi had already decided to pull out the sword. Although the sword strike was forced back, it basically destroyed the scabbard. However, the scabbard cracked but didn't fall apart, and the sword intent inside it became more and more turbulent. Every time Li Tianlan stared at it, he could clearly feel the surging and mighty killing intent in the scabbard, which was enough to kill all living beings. "I won't be able to do that tonight." Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Rushi's pure eyes and said seriously, "No matter what, don't pull out the sword, understand?" Dongqing Rushi was stunned and looked straight into Li Tianlan's eyes. After a long time she said softly, "I want to protect you." "Nonsense." Li Tianlan scolded her with a smile, and reached out to pinch her delicate little nose, while the other hand patted on the box beside him. "See, this is Sky Attack, the Sky Attack studied by your family. When your godfather gave me this gun, he said that it's a man's duty to protect his family. When did it become my family's turn to protect me?" "Family?" Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan with burning eyes. There seemed to be some shyness in her pure eyes, but she looked into his eyes bravely. Li Tianlan coughed, shook his head and said, "In any case, don't pull out the sword." Dongqing Rushi's eyes moved, and the corners of her mouth gently raised into a smile. She said no more. The business car stopped in the night. There was a T-junction in front of them, and right in front of them was a forest. "It's here." Deep Dream turned off the screen in her hand and said, "Through this forest, the village is 10 kilometers away, and it's also the target of our investigation this time. Let's go." Li Tianlan opened the door without hesitation. The number 3 defensive area planned by Zhongzhou State had a circumference of about 30 kilometers, and there was only one village in this area, but it was the largest of the 4 villages in the whole battlefield. At present, it could be confirmed that a force was stationed in the village, and it was most likely to be a local force of East Island, but no one could be sure which one it was. Once the final battle broke out, at least in the number 3 defensive area, this was definitely the toughest bone to chew, so the strongest reconnaissance team in the number 3 defensive area was assigned to investigate this area. Figuring out their general personnel, the forces they belonged to, and the strength of their high-level personnel was crucial for the next battle plan of Zhongzhou State. In the whole general trend, East Island was undoubtedly in a weak position, but in the final battle, East Island was the strongest party. They had suppressed everything and there was no way out. Whether the major forces won or lost this time, at least there was room for compromise. At worst, they would just lose some elites to negotiate with East Island. But if East Island lost, there would be a series of serious consequences such as the complete loss of the special warfare system, the economic collapse of East Island, and so on. They couldn't afford to lose it all. The stronger they were, the weaker they were. East Island tried to win the final battle, turn the situation around, and get the bargaining chips to negotiate with the other major forces. The other major forces were also covetously looking for a chance to give East Island a fatal blow at any time. The 7-day appointment that Shinichi Miyamoto, the superior of the Invincible Realm in East Island, mentioned was no longer a secret. At least every major force knew about it. Now it was the 3rd day, and the undercurrent in Changdao had become more and more obvious. Not only Zhongzhou State was carrying out reconnaissance operations, but the clubhouse where the elites of Zhongzhou State were hiding was also investigated by the major forces. Almost every day, the places where the major forces were most likely to hide had hostile superiors showing up. Every force was looking for a chance, but every force was restraining themselves. But as time went by, the final battle was getting closer and closer. They couldn't let East Island take the initiative to start the final battle. This was a consensus that every force knew. East Island had now locked the footholds of the major forces, but it kept silent and didn't take any action. This didn't mean that it was cowardly. It just meant that it wasn't fully prepared yet. But the 7-day period was getting closer and closer. Once East Island really took action, it basically meant that it had a lot of confidence. Therefore, every major force except East Island wanted to make East Island fight passively in advance before it was fully prepared. Wasn't the reconnaissance operation of Zhongzhou State another way of probing and forcing? In the silent night, as Li Tianlan got out of the car, Deep Dream, Sunset Shadow, Dongqing Rushi, and Du Hanin all got out of the business car. The 5 of them cautiously entered the woods in front of them at the same time. "Be careful," Deep Dream said in a serious tone. "Since the other party has occupied the village, they won't let go of the woods. They must have ambushes and traps in the woods. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow, go ahead and we'll follow. Be decisive when we encounter any situation. Let's go," Li Tianlan said blandly. The 5 figures moved in unison, rushing into the depths of the dense forest swiftly and cautiously. 1 kilometer. Everything was calm. 2 kilometers. It was silent. The 5 of them moved more and more cautiously. When they went 5 kilometers deep, Li Tianlan finally met the first patrol from the village. But before they could warn, Deep Dream had already killed them. 7 kilometers deep. The number of patrols kept increasing. Deep Dream, who had been moving forward, suddenly stopped. Almost at the same time, the 5 of them squatted down and hid in the bushes in front of them. Through the gaps in the bushes, 30 meters away, a patrol of only 3 people came over under the starlight, looking relaxed and casual. An expert. The pupils of the 5 contracted at the same time. Deep Dream seemed to know one of the 3. She narrowed her eyes and said in a weak voice, "The peak of the thunder-shocking realm." The 5 of them were silent and motionless. The patrol team made up of 3 people walked straight towards the bushes. "Get ready to take action." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. The dangerous light kept flashing in his eyes and he was highly focused. The distance between the 2 sides kept narrowing. 10 meters, 5 meters, 3 meters. The most important expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm walked over slowly. He seemed to want to relieve himself, so he directly unzipped his trousers in front of the bushes. Deep Dream, who had condensed her killing intent to the peak, suddenly burst out. But before she could make a move, the deep blue lightning spread all over the forest in an instant. Boom! The air within a radius of dozens of meters twisted violently. Deep Dream's rising figure paused. In their sight, a dark figure appeared almost out of thin air behind the thunder-shocking realm expert of East Island. A dazzling light suddenly lit up. In an instant, the violent sound was almost earth-shattering. Deep Dream did not make a move. The figure that suddenly appeared struck with all his might, and the whole forest seemed to be shaking. The lightning pierced through the sky and shot straight down from the sky. For a moment, there was only the dazzling light in front of everyone's eyes. The shadows of knives and swords kept spreading in the lightning, and the whole forest was instantly filled with violent and decisive killing intent. The moment the light spread, Dongqing Rushi's pure eyes suddenly became bright, and then they were completely covered by the deep blue light. The figure that suddenly appeared disappeared in the light. Li Tianlan's body stiffened slightly. A cold voice abruptly rang out the moment the light shone and disappeared. "What are you doing?" The lightning finally dissipated. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The body of the thunder-shocking realm expert of East Island had completely exploded. But Du Hanin, who had been at the end, suddenly took a step forward. She raised the 2 sabers in her hands and pointed the blades at Dongqing Rushi. Li Tianlan turned his head in shock. In his sight, Dongqing Rushi looked calm, but her whole body was close to his back. She held the famous sword Silence in one hand. In the other hand, she held a dagger that Li Tianlan had never seen before. The dagger had been unsheathed. The blade was scarlet, carved with gorgeous and complicated golden patterns. At this moment, the blades of Du Hanin's 2 sabers had been placed on Dongqing Rushi's neck, and Dongqing Rushi's body was closer to Li Tianlan than ever. The huge power in the field had not disappeared, and the aftermath roared in the air. But the space suddenly quieted down. Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Li Tianlan looked at Du Hanyin seriously. Chapter 210. Great Changes. This time, the undisguised attack, which was almost a show of force, came suddenly, but its momentum swept the whole mountain forest. The lightning, which had already surpassed the ultimate realm of the thunder-shocking realm, lit up for a moment and then suddenly disappeared. But for the investigation team led by Li Tianlan, this was a great change from inside to outside. The killing intent that was condensed to the extreme was perfectly hidden, suddenly broke out and then disappeared abruptly. The whole process took only a few seconds. In the light and shadow and killing intent that blocked their sight, each of them clearly felt the crisis. The external crisis. And the internal crisis. The mountain forest was quiet. The glaring blue lightning disappeared, and the killing intent faded like a tide. Only the power contained in that blow was still surging in the mountain forest. Not only the thunder-shocking realm expert from East Island who was attacked, but also his 2 companions and 2 patrols of more than 20 people dozens of meters away were all blown into countless pieces by that earth-shattering blow, along with the surrounding trees. The messy mountain forest reeked of blood. Sparse starlight fell from the sky again, and everything around seemed to become noisy and quiet. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow had already stood on both sides of Li Tianlan. They frowned and looked at the dagger in Dongqing Rushi's hand. They didn't speak, but their eyes gradually became cold. This could even be said to be the most subtle moment in Li Tianlan's life. Killing intent and tenderness, crisis and doubt, all kinds of emotions were completely intertwined, making him indescribably complicated. His eyes moved from Du Hanyin to Dongqing Rushi, and he seemed to be thinking about something. Dongqing Rushi looked blank. She looked at Li Tianlan quietly for a while, then turned her head slightly, and her eyes fell on Du Hanyin. Du Hanyin's eyes were cold, but her palms that were holding the 2 sabers were slightly exerting force. The bright and delicate blades trembled slightly because of the huge force, and suddenly drew a sad and soft red trace on Dongqing Rushi's white and delicate neck. But she knew that the person in front of her had a special identity. She was not only the most favored second miss of the Dongqing clan, but also the representative of the young generation of the giant group of Zhongzhou State in the special warfare system. Now she was Li Tianlan's fiancée. If she really killed her at this time, it would absolutely be a big trouble. She didn't withdraw her hand that was holding the saber, but she looked at Li Tianlan. "Don't you have anything to say?" Li Tianlan's eyes grew deeper and calmer. In Du Hanyin's perception at this moment, Li Tianlan had almost turned into nothingness. His essence, qi, spirit, and even his breathing were completely restrained. In this state he was clearly standing there, but it was as if he did not exist and could not be captured or controlled. Only Dongqing Rushi felt completely different from the others. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm and gentle, but there was a vague pressure like a mountain in them. She couldn't lock onto Li Tianlan either, but she could clearly sense the magnificent sword intent behind the nothingness. "She hurt me." Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan softly and said. There was no panic, no hatred, no vigilance and no sadness. She stood defenseless in front of Li Tianlan. The distance between them was so close that Dongqing Rushi only needed to shake her arm and she could stab the dagger in her hand into Li Tianlan's abdomen. As the youngest genius of Jade Pool, Dongqing Rushi was an expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. At this distance, even Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow were not sure to stop her. The only thing they could count on was the blade of Du Hanyin's knife on Dongqing Rushi's neck and Li Tianlan's own strength. Li Tianlan took a deep look at Dongqing Rushi, waved his hand and said to Du Hanyin, "Put the knife down." "Young master." Du Hanyin hesitated but did not move her hand. She did not have the traditional sense of loyalty to Li Tianlan, at least not now. But their ultimate goal was completely the same, and Li Tianlan had become her only hope for revenge. For this reason alone, Du Hanyin would risk her life to protect Li Tianlan. Now the dagger in Dongqing Rushi's hand was too dangerous. If she put it down, the consequences would be unpredictable. She bit her lip. Du Hanyin whispered, "Young master, she just wanted to kill you." At that moment, in the dazzling light and shadow, Du Hanyin did not see everything clearly, but she instinctively noticed that there was something wrong with Dongqing Rushi's action. Under such circumstances, the other party's action could not be explained at all. "Put it down." Li Tianlan's voice was not loud, but it was irresistible. Du Hanyin glanced at Dongqing Rushi coldly and put down the blade in her hand unwillingly. "What?" Li Tianlan asked blandly, letting Dongqing Rushi put the dagger at the most dangerous distance from him. Dongqing Rushi wanted to kill him? It was not that he could not accept such a fact, but Li Tianlan could not believe it at all. Because no matter how he thought about it, he could not think of a reason why Dongqing Rushi wanted to kill him. Since he entered the secular world, although he did not have much contact with the Dongqing clan, he could clearly feel the Dongqing clan's overwhelming kindness. Moreover, the Li family had done the Dongqing clan a great favor, and there was no resentment between the two sides. Although Li Tianlan had doubts about the Dongqing clan before, now that doubt had almost dissipated. Even if he and the Dongqing clan completely fell out, at worst they would be strangers. Moreover, he was now the young governor of Sai City. Even if the Dongqing clan did not want to help him, they would not be so stupid as to want to kill him. It made no sense at all. As for Dongqing Rushi herself, even if she did not want to fulfill the engagement, she would not use such a drastic means that would put the Dongqing clan in an irrecoverable crisis. Why on earth did she want to kill him? Or did she really want to kill him? Was it a misunderstanding? Or was it malice? I didn't want to kill you. Dongqing Rushi looked at Li Tianlan and said seriously. She had the purest and most flawless eyes. When she stared at Li Tianlan, no one could see any impurities in her eyes. There was only a faint gentleness and obedience in her eyes. I just want to stand with you when there is danger, no matter what it is. Sophistry. Du Hanin stood next to Dongqing Rushi, staring at the dagger in her hand and sneered. Li Tianlan was silent. You don't believe me? Dongqing Rushi's pure eyes seemed a little dim, but there was no grievance in them. They were as clear as ever. Can I have a look at this dagger? Li Tianlan suddenly said. Dongqing Rushi handed the dagger in her hand to Li Tianlan without hesitation, together with the scabbard. Her action made everyone, including Li Tianlan, feel relieved. But soon he frowned again. This could be said to be the most gorgeous dagger he had ever seen in his life. The whole dagger was scarlet, but it was covered from top to bottom with subtle and complicated golden patterns. The end of the hilt and the scabbard were inlaid with two small but pleasing crystals. Under the faint moonlight, the entire dagger seemed to be transparent, gleaming with exquisite light. Li Tianlan looked at it over and over again. Finally, at the end of the blade near the hilt, he saw two neat and meticulous traditional Chinese characters. Lovesickness. Was this the name of the dagger? Where did you get this dagger? Li Tianlan asked casually. Dongqing Rushi was stunned. She lowered her head and said calmly, I picked it up. Everyone could see that she didn't mean what she said, but Li Tianlan didn't say much. He just returned the dagger to her and said calmly, put it away. I really didn't want to kill you. Dongqing Rushi shook her head and didn't take lovesickness. Instead, she looked at Lin Shenyuan and emphasized it again. Li Tianlan nodded indifferently. He really didn't feel the killing intent just now. But if a really brilliant killer got close to him, it would be too late when he really felt the killing intent. Just like the attack just now, the mysterious man broke out his limit and retreated unscathed. Moreover, he even hid it from the perception of Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow. This was definitely the work of a top assassin in the dark world. Before he broke out, how could the people present feel anything wrong? Dongqing Rushi's performance today was indeed a little unusual. Li Tianlan couldn't be sure of anything, but now it was obviously not the time to say anything. There were priorities. At least in this mountain forest, the five of them couldn't delay any longer. Li Tianlan glanced at the surrounding mountain forest. The so-called mountain forest had actually become a piece of flat land. All the trees within dozens of meters were shattered by that blow and turned into powder and debris. Only a few meters in front of them were left with a piece of flesh and blood to prove what had just happened. Li Tianlan's eyes flickered. He made a prompt decision and said without hesitation, retreat. I'll lead the way. Deep Dream will stay behind, Sunset Shadow said immediately. His face was also a little gloomy. He looked at Li Tianlan and said with a wry smile, young master, I'm afraid we're in big trouble this time. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows, but he didn't hesitate. He turned around and left directly. From the beginning of the attack, he knew that something was wrong this time. Although he didn't know which East Island force was stationed in the village ahead, the mysterious figure who killed the experts of East Island was equivalent to setting them up. Let alone Li Tianlan, even Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow, who were also top assassins, didn't see clearly who the other party was. The two of them were not much worse than the other party, but the top assassins always retreated unscathed after breaking out in an instant. That moment was indeed too abrupt. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow were all focused on the experts of East Island at that time, so they were directly set up by someone when they were not on guard. Li Tianlan wasn't sure if Dongqing Rushi really wanted to kill him, but the mysterious assassin who suddenly appeared was definitely up to no good. Such a huge momentum was completely intentional by the other party. As long as the nearby East Island elites were not blind, who wouldn't know that someone had invaded at this time? At this moment, it would be good if the 5 of them could retreat unscathed, let alone investigate. They reorganized the formation as soon as possible. Li Tianlan took 2 steps and subconsciously looked back. In his sight, Dongqing Rushi's body was motionless. Her clear eyes stared at him blankly, as if she had lost a lot of spirit. "Don't just stand there." Li Tianlan turned back and grabbed her. He said in a calm tone, "Let's talk about it when we get back." "I really didn't want to kill you." Dongqing Rushi lowered her head, and there was finally a trace of grievance in her voice. Li Tianlan's heart trembled. He nodded and said yes. Dongqing Rushi held Li Tianlan's hand tightly and didn't want to let go no matter what. But from an angle that no one could see, no one noticed the look in the eyes of the second miss of the Dongqing clan. It was still a pair of crystal-clear eyes. But at this moment, one of Dongqing Rushi's eyes was full of confusion and grievance, while the other eye was full of clarity and firmness. Messy and quick footsteps sounded behind them. As expected, East Island reacted immediately and quickly mobilized people to encircle and outflank them. There was no roar, no words. Everyone rushed into the mountain forest in silence, and the killing intent permeated every inch of the entire mountain forest. Li Tianlan and the other 4 quickly rushed to the exit of the mountain forest. Sunset Shadow walked in front of Li Tianlan and said quickly with a determined face, "Young master, the thunder-shocking realm expert who was killed just now belongs to Jifeng Sword Raining School. Deep Dream and I met him when we were in America. He has a high status in Jifeng Sword Raining School, but he came out to patrol in person. It's very likely that Jifeng Sword Raining School is not the only force stationed here. Young master, if things go wrong later we will try our best to hold them back. You and Miss Dongqing go first." Of course, the "we" he mentioned was not only him and Deep Dream, but also Du Hanin. Du Hanin looked calm and had no intention of objecting. "If you want to go, let's go together," Li Tianlan said calmly with no expression on his face. Jifeng Sword Raining School, one of the 3 holy lands of East Island. It was the force with the longest history in the whole of East Island. In fact, among the 3 holy lands of martial arts in East Island, Tianhai Wuji, the current top expert of East Island, founded Wuji Palace. But in the hearts of the people in the Dark World, Jifeng Sword Raining School was actually much more difficult to deal with than Wuji Palace. No matter how amazing Tianhai Wuji was, Wuji Palace had been developing for a short time. What Tianhai Wuji left in Wuji Palace was the sabersmanship and the way of Wuji, which was his own martial arts. Although it was strong, it was not perfect because of its lack of foundation. But Jifeng Sword Raining School was the martial arts force with the longest history in East Island. It respected the sword, and Jifeng swordsmanship was a top unique technique that had been tempered by countless generations. After the Li family in Zhongzhou state was destroyed, Jifeng swordsmanship had been recognized as one of the fiercest swordsmanship in the Dark World. When the 5 of them went deep into the mountain forest, they were set up and exposed before they could investigate. Next, they would have to face the encirclement and suppression of the experts of Jifeng Sword Raining School and other forces. In addition to admitting that they were unlucky, Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow also prepared for the worst. Li Tianlan took Dongqing Rushi's hand and walked quickly. In the darkness, his eyes had narrowed tightly, sharp and cold. The mysterious assassin appeared at such a coincidental time. It could be said that he knew their operation like the back of his hand. Behind this ambush there was an obvious aura of conspiracy. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Speed up. Now that you're here, do you still want to leave?" A soft voice rang out and instantly spread through most of the mountain forest. Sunset Shadow's figure suddenly stopped. Li Tianlan's pupils also contracted slightly. Behind them were endless pursuers, and right in front of them were 7 or 8 hazy and powerful figures. All of them were in the thunder-shocking realm. There were interceptions in front and pursuers behind. The whole mountain forest was vaguely like an inescapable net, completely surrounding Li Tianlan and the other 4 people. Chapter 211. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Under the gloomy night, one figure after another stepped out of the darkness and gradually became clear in front of Li Tianlan's eyes. Dressed in black close-fitting warrior suits and with long swords hanging from their waists, The 7 people were dressed in the same way and acted in the same way. The killing intent suddenly rose within a radius of hundreds of meters. Before they started fighting, the air in the nearby forest had begun to twist and fluctuate. When the eyes of the two sides met, everything they saw became blurred and clear. 7 thunder-shocking realm experts. Not only Li Tianlan, but also Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow felt their hearts sink. In the current situation of the Dark World, no matter what battlefield they were on, any thunder-shocking realm expert could be said to be an absolute high-end force, and a half-step invincible realm expert was a deterrent killing weapon. As for invincible realm experts, which invincible realm expert didn't have too many inside stories? It was no exaggeration to say that a considerable part of the interests of the Dark World were concentrated on each invincible realm expert. They were the real bigwigs who were related to the fate of the country and the clan, and also held each other back. Such people would not take action at all unless it was a critical moment. On most occasions, the number of thunder-shocking realm experts of each force directly determined whether a force was strong or not. Because of this, Samsara Palace could maintain its imposing manner on many occasions. Among the 12 super masters of Samsara, the weakest was an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. In the whole Dark World, only a few forces such as the Wang family of Beihai and the Vatican could provide such a lineup. It might not be difficult for other forces to gather together 12 thunder-shocking realm experts, but to have 12 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was simply a pipe dream. Big Dipper. Wind Ghost. Deep Dream finally saw the faces of the 7 experts clearly. Her face suddenly changed and her tone seemed to be a little bitter. Sunset Shadow's eyes were solemn and he slowly stepped back. As soon as he stepped back, Li Tianlan, Dongqing Rushi, and Du Hanyin also stepped back. Only Deep Dream stepped forward. In just a few seconds, the 5 people had changed their formation. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow were at the forefront, Li Tianlan was in the middle, and Dongqing Rushi and Du Hanyin were behind. The 2 top assassins of Sai City looked at each other. The seriousness and solemnity in their eyes had disappeared, leaving only determination. Long time no see, you two. The 7 thunder-shocking realm experts were not in a hurry, but the murderous intent in the air was almost solid. Among the 7 people, the man walking in the front glanced at Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow. A trace of surprise flashed in his eyes, which was immediately replaced by sharp killing intent. This was a man in his 40s. He was not fat, but because of his short height, he looked a little bloated. He looked like a very amiable person, but at this moment he was full of ferocity and violence similar to that of a beast. His Chinese was very fluent and his pronunciation was perfect. I thought the so-called surprise would be an important figure in the Wang family of Beihai, but I didn't expect it to be Sai City. But it's good, no, it's very good. Surprise? Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow said in unison. The so-called surprise, of course, could only be given by others. This word contained too many things, but they couldn't think of who gave the Big Dipper such a surprise. The first deputy sect leader of Jifeng Sword Raining School, codenamed the Big Dipper, was an expert of the half-step invincible realm, and not an ordinary one. Tianhai Wuji of Wuji Palace could be said to be the #1 person in martial arts in East Island, but the Big Dipper could be said to be the #1 person under several invincible realm grandmasters in East Island. This person was one of the most active people in the outside world in recent years. He had been famous for many years and this period of time could be said to be his peak. 6 years ago, he fought with Firmament of the Wang family of Beihai in Dongdu and neither won nor lost. 4 years ago, he seriously injured the top assassin Drifting Cloud, known as one of the double walls of Sai City at the border of Zhongzhou State. 4 years ago, he encountered tribulation in Snow Country and escaped unscathed. 2 years ago, he successfully sniped the general, the 3rd Supermaster of Samsara Palace in Wellington. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow met the Big Dipper in Delhi a year ago in Europe. The 2 joined forces and barely forced the Big Dipper to retreat. The Big Dipper's own achievements were enough to prove that he was a super expert who could stand side by side with Tribulation, Saint, and Firmament. With his identity, if it weren't for the so-called surprise, he shouldn't have jumped out so eagerly, and he shouldn't even be in this village. Who on earth gave him today's surprise? There was a flash of deep thought in the eyes of Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow. The Big Dipper's surprise was undoubtedly their misfortune. Was there a mole around them who gave this surprise to the Big Dipper? Or an unknown enemy? Of course it's a surprise. The Big Dipper smiled. Instead of being peaceful, he looked more and more ferocious. His eyes skipped over Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow and fell directly on Li Tianlan. This young man is the biggest surprise. The faces of Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow changed dramatically. The Big Dipper had already stretched out his hand and pointed directly at Li Tianlan. "Catch this young man." His voice was low, but there was a strange fire in his eyes. He said word by word, "At all costs." His outstretched hand chopped down fiercely. Boom! In the violent roar, the air in front of the Big Dipper, which had been twisted to the extreme, suddenly exploded. A gust of wind rose. The dazzling blue lightning spread with the wind in an instant. Before the shadow of the Big Dipper waving his fingers disappeared, he had already crossed the distance of dozens of meters in one step and went straight for Li Tianlan. He couldn't wait. Kill? The moment the Big Dipper approached, Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow, who had adjusted their state to the peak, took a step forward and broke out with all their strength without hesitation. Without adjusting or probing, they were almost in a desperate situation today. Jifeng's sword training school was stationed in this village and had endless reinforcements. They were alone. The longer they delayed, the more disadvantageous it would be for them. They had to kill their way out as soon as possible. The Big Dipper, who had the upper hand, would do whatever it took, so they had no way out. So, final kill. As soon as the battle began, Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow had already used their strongest power and unique skills at all costs. The great power ran directly from inside to outside. Strands of blue lightning formed a light curtain in the blink of an eye in the gust of wind raised by the Big Dipper. The Big Dipper stepped forward. The gust of wind whistled with the lightning. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow moved forward together. The light curtain fluctuated. In the twisted air, the lightning was like a tide. In an instant, the Big Dipper, who was the first to approach them, felt great danger. Sunset Shadow and Deep Dream had been completely surrounded by light and shadow. In the heavy light and shadow, the Big Dipper seemed to see that the two of them had never taken out their weapons at all. The two of them moved their hands at the same time. It seemed that they were making a seal. They had different fingers, but they had a completely complementary aura. This was a handprint that had never appeared in the dark world. It was strange and unfathomable. The Big Dipper's face changed dramatically. He had encountered and fought with Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow in Europe. At that time, although the two of them forced him to retreat, the Big Dipper thought that if he fought with all his strength, Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow would be no match for him. But at that time, the Big Dipper had never seen such complicated handprints on the two of them. 1 second. Or 2 seconds. The lightning on Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow became more and more dazzling. The handprints were ever-changing and instantly merged into one. There was only killing intent left between heaven and earth. It was like the purest will, cold, silent, violent, and determined. Everything in the world turned into killing intent, and killing intent. This move was called All-Embracing Collection. This was the unique skill of Situ Tsangyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou state, but it was also a unique skill that had never been seen in the world. It was not so much a move as half a move, because the person who passed the unique skill to Situ Tsangyue had only created half a move. The remaining half was completely supplemented by Situ Tsangyue based on the martial will displayed in that move. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow vaguely knew the story of this unique skill, and they could even guess who had passed this move to Situ Tsangyue. Because they could clearly perceive the sadness, pain, and love in Situ Tsangyue's eyes when she passed this move to them. She once said that the talented and promising chosen one had wanted to create a set of seals that could keep pace with the family swordsmanship. A set of seals that far surpassed the Buddhist incantation of 9 words of the Great Soaring Temple. And a set of seals that could make people enter the invincible realm or even break through the invincible realm. He tried to surpass his ancestors, to be truly invincible and to look down on the world. However, he only created half a move of that set of seals, and then he died at the border. For many years, Situ Tsangyue had devoted almost all her attention to this unique skill. Based on the all-embracing collection, she kept exploring it by herself. Even Tribulation's Buddhist incantation of 9 words was greatly affected by this. Tribulation might not have the talent of that brilliant figure, but he had always inherited the will of that brilliant figure and tried to make his Buddhist incantation of 9 words far surpass the Buddhist incantation of 9 words of the Great Soaring Temple. Who could have such an impact on Situ Tsangyue and Tribulation? Li Kuangtu. It could only be Li Kuangtu. At least half of the all-embracing collection belonged to the inheritance of the Li family. The most powerful sword intent was also the most powerful seal. The complicated handprints were completely integrated into one. In a split second, the entire forest was filled with light. A surging killing intent followed the movement of the heavens and earth, filling every corner of the forest. Lightning bolts shot out endlessly, like the surging sea, as if the heavens were falling and the earth was splitting. Within a radius of hundreds of meters under the seal, it was all scorched earth. Sunset Shadow and Deep Dream's faces were pale, and blood was surging from the corners of their mouths. But their eyes were still cold and they changed their gestures again. The second half of the all-embracing collection. Endless light suddenly began to condense and the light curtain shrank. It was obvious that the two of them made a move, but all the light turned into an unimaginably huge thunderbolt. It was more than a thunderbolt. The place covered by the light was simply a world. The thunderbolt, with the terrifying power of heaven, was surging and mighty. The Big Dipper, whose face changed dramatically, made a move with all his strength. The long sword was unsheathed, but it was not an attack. The sharp snow-white peak swept through the forest. The wind howled in the forest, and the air was instantly twisted. In the nothingness, a gaseous wall, which was flashing with lightning and condensed to the extreme, appeared in an instant. The wind surged around the wall, spreading for hundreds of meters in the blink of an eye, blocking everything. This was the strongest defensive unique skill of the Jifeng Sword Raining School. The Wall of Gale. Boom. The thunderbolt, which was like a world, hit the wind wall hard like a torrent. It was just a second, but it seemed like a long time. The towering wall in front of them suddenly exploded, and the twisted air shot in all directions. But the violent thunderbolt completely covered the Big Dipper and the 6 thundershocking realm experts behind him in an instant. Chapter 212. It was an unprecedented unique skill and extremely surging power. The lightning brought by the all-embracing collection boiled in the night. It was a killing intent and ferocity that could obliterate everything. It was mighty and mighty. The wind wall that the Big Dipper had condensed with all his strength in an instant was completely torn apart at once. Not only him, but also the other 6 thundershocking realm experts who were a little behind him were sent flying at the same time under the overwhelming lightning. In addition to the lightning under the night sky, there was only the almost deafening thunder roaring and shaking wildly. The lightning destroyed everything, and the world trembled under the killing intent. A faint scream rang out and was immediately drowned out by the hysterical thunder. The Big Dipper rushed to the front, but he retreated the fastest. Obviously the others were not so lucky. The 6 thunder-shocking realm experts were stunned for a moment, and the one who retreated a little slower was directly swept into the tide-like torrent of lightning. As soon as the scream came out, his body had been completely shattered in the lightning along with a large number of trees and dust. The remaining 6 people, including the Big Dipper, were all scared out of their wits. They did not need any orders. As they retreated, 6 wind walls of different sizes had been formed in the air. The strong wind whistled, but before the airflow spread, it was directly smashed by the concentrated lightning. The air seemed to have disappeared. The endless lightning gathered together, like a light curtain, a torrent, or a sea rising and falling. Wherever it passed, it almost formed a pseudo-domain. The 6 wind walls in front and behind were completely torn apart at once, covering everything in front of them. The joint attack of Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow was infinitely close to the real invincible realm. However, this attack severely injured the Big Dipper, and the two of them also paid a huge price. The raging power came from inside to outside. The more destructive power they caused, the more power they had to bear. This desperate attack was earth-shattering. In an instant, Li Tianlan felt that the strength of Sunset Shadow and Deep Dream had directly fallen from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm to the fire-flaming realm, and their auras were unprecedentedly weak. The lightning went all the way forward. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow, whose faces were pale and almost bloodless, did not hesitate to pull Li Tianlan and rush out of the forest in another direction. The roaring lightning rushed through the forest for hundreds of meters in the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, all the plants and ambushing soldiers in the forest were turned into ashes. The Big Dipper, who had been seriously injured before he made a move, looked ferocious. His whole body was filled with killing intent and he was completely violent. The lightning that filled the sky finally stopped. However, the final battle had officially begun. "I'll go after him." In the forest that suddenly fell silent, a thin man beside the Big Dipper said. Then he suddenly chased after Li Tianlan and the others like a gust of wind. He was Wind Ghost, one of the visiting professors of Jifeng Sword Raining School. His strength was far less than that of the Big Dipper, but his speed was second to none in Jifeng Sword Raining School. Even among all the people at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, he was one of the fastest. Big Dipper was in a mess and his warrior uniform was almost completely torn apart. He had just taken a step forward when his face suddenly flushed red. "Pooh! He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his powerful aura immediately began to decline. This was the most serious internal injury he had ever suffered in the dark world, and it happened in his own territory. Intense resentment and anger twisted his chubby face. Big Dipper suddenly roared and chased after Wind Ghost, ignoring his injuries. The other four did not hesitate at all and chased after Big Dipper. The 7 Thunder-Shocking Realm experts were all from Jifeng Sword Raining School. Except for the Big Dipper and Wind Ghost, the others had not reached the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm, but they were also real experts. These 7 people had now arrived in Changdao, representing most of the high-end combat capability of Jifeng Sword Raining School. Now they had lost one person before the official fight, and the others were more or less injured. Such a situation was simply a great shame. This kind of emotion was not anger but hatred. When the lightning disappeared, everyone was desperately chasing after them, wishing they could skin Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow to vent their hatred. In this way their strength was not the same, and the speed of the pursuit was inevitably different. The original neat formation was suddenly pulled apart. Although they noticed the situation, no one cared. Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow were seriously injured. For them, the most difficult person in the 5-member group now was Li Tianlan, who was known as the Young Heavenly Sun in Zhongzhou State. He was also the most important goal of their trip. Except for Li Tianlan, the others were nothing to be afraid of. But even so, Wind Ghost and Big Dipper were still extremely cautious. After going 800 meters in the direction of Li Tianlan's retreat and seeing no trace, they deliberately slowed down. After a while, the Big Dipper gradually approached. A few seconds later, the other 4 experts at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm also appeared within the support distance of the 2. The 6 people kept a safe distance and moved forward together. On the periphery of the forest, a large number of elites were all gathered and began to search in the forest. After a fierce battle, there was often an oppressive silence. The periphery of the forest was lit up and noisy, but the route where Li Tianlan and the others retreated was dead silent. Only the footsteps of the Big Dipper and Wind Ghost echoed in the forest. They can't have gone far. The Big Dipper said in a cold tone, Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow are seriously injured. No matter how fast Li Tianlan is, it's impossible for him to run here with 4 people without being discovered. We found the wrong position. I didn't find any traces left by them changing directions. In this situation they don't have time to do a lot of things. Wind Ghost, who was at the forefront, glanced around, shook his head and said in a hoarse voice, I suggest we continue to chase them. Does it make sense? The Big Dipper asked and said lightly, the joint attack of Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow is infinitely close to the invincible realm. If this kind of power can hurt me, they won't be much better off. We've wasted no more than 10 seconds. During this time they have rushed out a distance of 100 or 200 meters at most. With the speed of your Wind Ghost, you can see their traces after chasing them for 500 meters at most. Now, he hadn't finished his words, but the meaning he wanted to express was completely clear. If they had changed directions to escape, it's impossible not to leave a flaw. But I've been chasing them all the way and found nothing. Wind Ghost shook his head. If they hadn't changed directions or followed this path, his voice suddenly stopped, and a conjecture that even he felt absurd suddenly came to his mind. The Big Dipper and Wind Ghost looked at each other. Clap. A light sound suddenly came from 20 or 30 meters ahead, but it sounded like thunder in the ears of the Big Dipper and Wind Ghost. Watch out. The 2 turned around at the same time and rushed to the 4 Thunder-Shocking Realm experts behind them. If they didn't change directions or escape along this path, the only possibility was that they didn't intend to run at all. Ambush? Would Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow bring a powerful young heavenly sun to ambush and kill them when their combat capability was seriously insufficient and the strongest 2 were seriously injured? Neither the Big Dipper nor Wind Ghost thought it was possible, but now it seemed to be the most likely. So the Big Dipper and Wind Ghost turned around at the same time, wanting to gather with their own people as soon as possible. There was no sound in the mountain forest. The Big Dipper, who had turned around, suddenly felt relieved. What he worried most was that they would be assassinated by Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow before they were prepared. Now the 4 people behind them were in good condition, and he had already warned them. All 3 parties were at a safe distance. It would only take a few seconds for the 6 of them to completely gather. But at the moment when the Big Dipper felt relieved, a cold but condensed killing intent suddenly broke out silently. Deep Dream. Sunset Shadow. One after the other, 2 tiny and somewhat ridiculous thunderbolts lit up in front of them. One thunderbolt pierced the Big Dipper's chest, and the other pierced the back of the Big Dipper's head. The tiny and dim thunderbolts moved extremely fast, intertwining and spreading rapidly in the gloomy night. The figures of Sunset Shadow and Deep Dream almost instantly approached the Big Dipper in a flash. A shocking change occurred. The killing intent that had been brewing and suppressed to the extreme suddenly burst out in the most unscrupulous way. This was an assassination, and it was also a desperate fight. Because there was no way out for this ambush. The two sharp daggers were like two rays of flowing light. The moment they lit up, the dazzling sharpness had reached the Big Dipper's chest and back along with the dim thunderbolts. At the moment of life and death, the Big Dipper suddenly roared, and the thunderbolts all over his body burst out wildly. The dazzling light met the two faint rays of Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow. The dark mountain forest suddenly became as bright as day, and the light and killing intent soared into the sky. Sunset Shadow's determination and Deep Dream's elegance were drowned in the sharp light and killing intent and completely disappeared. After all, the Big Dipper miscalculated one thing. In other words, the 7 Thundershocking Realm experts all miscalculated one thing. They seriously underestimated the combat capability of Dongqing Rushi and Du Hanin. A genius of Jade Pool, a 19-year-old expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, was enough to be in existence that no one could be careless on this battlefield. But before the Battle of Kyoto, she fled with Li Beidian, Ning Qianqing, and the others and never made a move. Even if she wanted to draw her sword at a critical moment, it was suppressed by a mysterious expert. East Island might know Dongqing Rushi's name, but they knew very little about her combat capability. She was a mysterious genius who had been wandering between the Dongqing clan and Jade Pool since she was a child. She was a stranger to Zhongzhou State, let alone East Island. And Du Hanin was also unknown. Her wind vein had changed. After coming to East Island, she returned to the fire-flaming realm, and a few days ago she broke through the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm and became a new expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. Du Hanin could also be said to be a talent with great development potential. But with the destruction of the Du family, she was killed before she could grow up. After a few years of silence, she rose again. East Island naturally didn't have her information. But whether it was her or Dongqing Rushi, their combat capability was beyond doubt. The Big Dipper and Wind Ghost took it for granted that their strength was ordinary. In their expectation, since it was an ambush, then the 5 people, including Deep Dream, Sunset Shadow, and Li Tianlan, were most likely to ambush the 4 relatively weak Thundershocking Realm experts behind them. After killing them, they would join hands to fight against him and Wind Ghost. This was the safest speculation, but it was also the most wrong speculation. In a real high-end battle, one wrong step would lead to a desperate situation. At this moment, the seriously injured Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow broke out with all their strength to assassinate the Big Dipper. But the 2 experts at the peak of the fire-flaming realm were ambushing 4 Thundershocking Realm experts, which was ridiculous. Li Tianlan alone ambushed Wind Ghost, who was considered a strong expert among the experts at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm. This was the Dark World. In the general trend, no one could relax and no one dared to relax. The calmness of one moment seemed to always be brewing the danger of the next second. Crisis, blood, life and death battles and predicaments were eternal themes. Who could relax? Who could be calm? Dongqing Rushi and Du Hanin couldn't. Deep Dream, Sunset Shadow, and the Big Dipper couldn't. The 4 Thundershocking Realm experts couldn't. Neither could Li Tianlan or Wind Ghost. If they relaxed a little less, they might end up dead. Wind Ghost turned around and he suddenly took back the step that he had taken. At the same time as Sunset Shadow and Deep Dream jumped up, Li Tianlan also appeared in front of him. Black clothes, silver swords, and shocking killing intent. 3 shadows surrounded Wind Ghost in the center. Even Li Tianlan's real body, the exact same posture, the exact same killing intent. Shadow formula. The 14 blades, slaughter. In the history of the Li family, this sword had killed experts of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan had used this sword to kill the Prince of East Island. Today this sword could also kill someone at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm. In front of Jifeng's sword training school, which was famous for its fierce and violent sword intent, the Li family's sword light and sword intent were still brilliant. 3 shadows and Li Tianlan himself all appeared in front of Wind Ghost. Li Tianlan had to move forward. The sudden change had just occurred, but the killing intent was already vivid. In a hurry, this was a desperate ambush. There was no stalemate, only the outbreak, the extreme outbreak. After a moment, when the sword light subsided, when the lightning went out, was it a desperate situation? Or a way out? Li Tianlan didn't want to think about it. He could only move forward, not back. Chapter 213. In the blink of an eye the ambush had just begun, but it had already reached the end of life and death. Silent, fierce, crazy. The shadows of swords and sabers flashed and rose in the forest. Thunder and raging fire filled the air. The pursuit and escape had turned into a life-and-death battle within 10 seconds. The battle in the dark world had never had so many rules and regulations. Killing the enemy with the most powerful force in the shortest time was enough to sum up everything. In this world without benevolence, righteousness, and morality, life and death were the only two extreme truths. Perhaps because of this, many people regarded the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State as the strongest force in the dark world. It was not only because of the ranking of Zhongzhou Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong in the divine list, but also because of the martial arts inheritance of the Wang family of Beihai. For hundreds of years, no matter how the martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai changed, the true meaning they pursued remained the same. That was eruption. They could give up on defense, speed, and strength. They could give up on everything, but they would never give up on the pursuit of extreme explosive power. Whether it was Wang Tianzong or an ordinary expert of the Wang family of Beihai, they could completely vent all their combat capability in the shortest time and destroy all the obstacles in front of them. Their instantaneous outburst did not belong to any top assassin, and their continuous outburst made everyone feel desperate. The Wang family of Beihai could have its current status not because of Wang Tianzong. In the final analysis, it was only because of 3 words. That was explosive power. Absolute explosive force might not determine a person's achievements in martial arts, but it could definitely improve a person's combat capability to the greatest extent. Experts from the Wang family of Beihai, no matter how strong or weak their real strength was, were experts when they went all out. At the very least, they were stronger than most experts in the same realm. Among all the martial arts forces in Zhongzhou State, Jade Pool was the one most influenced by the Wang family of Beihai's martial arts. The Jade Pool's martial arts extended from the most basic 3-sword storms to the 7-sword styles, which were the main sword essences. The sword essences of different sword storms and sword styles were also different. It looked like there were many different styles, but more than half of the Jade Pool's 7 unique skills pursued explosive power. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State, mainly practiced the 9 heavens wind and thunder sword. Su Chu specialized in the wind and thunder howling sword art. Dongqing Rushi majored in the peerless myriad sword. Its core essence was the pursuit of extreme explosive power. Because of this, Dongqing Rushi, who held the famous sword of Jade Pool, Silence, gave everyone a huge surprise as soon as she made her move. Lightning and raging fire intertwined. At the moment when everyone's eyes were filled with light and shadow, Dongqing Rushi, who made a move 1 second earlier than Du Hanin, suddenly shook the long sword in her hand. The Silence sword suddenly began to tremble slightly. Even though the sword was not unsheathed, the cold sword essence was already hovering in the air. The 4 thunder-shocking realm experts hadn't realized what was going on, but it didn't mean that they couldn't react. The moment Dongqing Rushi appeared in their sight, the 4 of them drew their swords at the same time out of instinct. Hurricane Slash. The Jifeng sword raining school was the most basic technique, but it was also the most important technique. 4 slender swords suddenly stabbed forward. It was the simplest movement, but as the blade of the sword advanced, a sudden gust of wind blew in the forest. The sword light was like thunder, and the whole battlefield was instantly filled with 4 deep and dangerous blue lights. Dongqing Rushi's figure had already risen into the air. Before the 4 blue sword lights covered her with the gust of wind, her figure had already flown directly into the night sky covered by trees. The silent sword was violently civilized. The sword body wrapped in the scabbard looked simple and solemn, but at this time, the whole sword body was strangely filled with a layer of clear light. The clear light spread softly in the sky. Dongqing Rushi's figure flew higher and higher, becoming blurred in the air. Only the clear light was still spreading. It was like a bright moon in the sky. Extremely slow but also extremely fast. Just in the blink of an eye, the blue light in the air suddenly brightened. The clear sword essence was instantly stained with the orange flame. The fire kept falling one after another. There was a faint sound of thunder in the air. Dongqing Rushi's blurred figure suddenly became clear. She held the sword with both hands and stabbed down. The fire fell. The figure fell. The sharp sword and the sharp eyes. But it was with the concentration of the whole sky. The starting movement of the heavenly flying fairy sword. The sword essence of the peerless myriad sword. Without any reservation, Dongqing Rushi broke out to the extreme. The falling fire in the air merged and solidified under Dongqing Rushi. The fire shot everywhere and the hot temperature swept across the sky. A giant sword with a length of hundreds of meters suddenly took shape in the air. The giant sword was surrounded by the fire. It followed Dongqing Rushi to stab down. Looking from a distance, it seemed that Dongqing Rushi was pushing a giant sword that was countless times larger than her body in the high sky, killing everything below. Silence was not out of the scabbard, but Dongqing Rushi, who was trying her best, had already used the sword essence outside the scabbard of silence to the extreme. The huge force hurt her body, but it also made her sword directly break through the extreme of the fire-flaming realm. Disperse. The 4 thunder-shocking realm experts below did not hesitate or panic in the face of the soaring sword. The leader gave a low shout and the 4 of them began to move. Du Hanyin, who was 1 second later than Dongqing Rushi, rushed to the 4 of them almost at the same time. The 2 sabers in her hands were shining, and she made full use of the mutated wind vein. In the blink of an eye, Du Hanyin's speed had reached the extreme. She waved the sabers with all her strength at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. The saber energy broke through the air. The 4 thunder-shocking realm experts seemed to be attacked at the same time, and they suddenly stopped moving when they wanted to disperse. The giant sword surrounded by fire fell from the air with a loud bang. In the explosive sound that sounded like an earthquake, all the trees within a radius of 100 meters rose into the sky in the raging fire. Dongqing Rushi, Du Hanyin, and the 4 thunder-shocking realm experts disappeared on the horizon and fell directly into the deep pit that was blasted by the sword. The deafening sound almost attracted everyone's attention. The Big Dipper instinctively glanced at the fire. On the battlefield surrounded by fire, the moment they fell, he clearly saw Du Hanyin's figure jump into the center of the fire. Her figure was spinning wildly like a top, and the cold and sharp blade was like a flower in full bloom in the fire, with the light of death. The Big Dipper suddenly roared. The short sabers of Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow had already reached his back. In a split second, his figure jerked to one side. 2 saber lights brushed past his body, leaving 2 deep bloody marks on his body. The figure of the Big Dipper rushed to the sky. The short sabers of Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow collided with each other and slashed upward at the same time. A flash of dazzling blue lightning instantly bloomed between the 2 sabers and directly turned into a natural arc, sweeping toward the Big Dipper's body with endless sharpness and killing intent. At this critical moment, the lightning all over the Big Dipper's body was almost concentrated to the limit. To everyone's surprise, he did not fight back. He even directly left Sunset Shadow and Deep Dream, and did not check the situation of the 4 thunder-shocking realm experts behind him. His body shook violently in the air, and in an instant he directly pounced on Li Tianlan. Regardless of everything. Even if he had to bear the full blow of Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow, even if he fell to the thunder-shocking realm, even if he would die, he still rushed toward Li Tianlan. This person was a key figure in Zhongzhou state. Whether he died or was captured alive, it was enough to change the overall situation. So, there was no turning back. The Big Dipper drew his sword. A storm rose and whistled above the tip of his sword. Closer. Even closer. 20 meters. No. Behind him, the frightened voices of Deep Dream and Sunset Shadow rang out. The Big Dipper's eyes suddenly lit up. At such a close distance, if he and Wind Ghost joined forces, any bullshit young heavenly son would definitely die. Behind him, a bolt of lightning that seemed to be formed by nature whizzed and directly smashed the wind wall behind him, fiercely striking his back. Blood gushed from the corners of the Big Dipper's mouth. Wherever the lightning raged, his body had almost completely cracked, revealing the ghastly white bones. But his palm holding the sword was still stable. The long sword swept across. The gale rushed out of the tip of his sword in an instant with the lightning. The lightning entangled in the wind and shone brightly, like a raging tornado of thunder. Li Tianlan looked back in a hurry and had no time to react. The tornado had hit him hard, and the violent wind shook his body in an instant, sending him high into the sky. The sword light lit up again. Wind Ghost drew the sword. The moment Li Tianlan was blown away, Wind Ghost's body appeared directly above Li Tianlan's head with the wind. The blade chopped down. The bright sword light penetrated the gale and suddenly triggered the thunder. Wind Ghost's figure looked unrestrained and relaxed in the air, but every sword move was full of extreme sharpness and violence. Jifeng Sword Raining. The ultimate unique skill of Jifeng Sword Raining School. The sword light danced in the wind with the thunder. Li Tianlan's body rose into the air. As Wind Ghost chopped down with his sword again and again, Li Tianlan's body was completely out of balance under the sharp sword intent and the extremely ingenious power. He couldn't land in the gale and thunder. The Big Dipper, who was almost covered in blood, shook the long sword, and the second gale suddenly rose. The Big Dipper laughed wildly. Just as he was about to move forward, his whole body suddenly floated uncontrollably. The Big Dipper's face changed dramatically and he suddenly looked back. In his sight, Deep Dream was still rushing forward. But Sunset Shadow had stopped where he was. He quickly made a gesture with his hands and his aura soared in an instant. The Big Dipper was looking at Sunset Shadow. Sunset Shadow was also looking at the Big Dipper. There was only firmness in his eyes. Young Governor must not die. His hands made a gesture and finally stopped. Sunset Shadow. Deep Dream's scream was unprecedentedly shrill. She knew the last move of Sunset Shadow. It was the last move that even she didn't know. Or rather, it was half a move. This half move was called immortality. Chapter 214. Among all the assassins in Sai City, Sunset Shadow was a relatively unknown figure. He had joined Sai City for the shortest time and spent the least time in Mount Taibai. He was low-key, gentle, and taciturn. The only thing that impressed people was his strength at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. As his partner, Deep Dream often felt that she didn't know Sunset Shadow. This top assassin, who had been trusted deeply since he joined Sai City 5 years ago, spent most of his time doing his own thing in silence, killing, observing, and learning. He didn't look cold-blooded and liked to laugh, but he rarely spoke. Deep Dream never denied the tacit understanding between her and him, but this tacit understanding often came from Sunset Shadow's own cooperation. Deep Dream didn't know what he was thinking, what he wanted, and what he wanted to pursue. In their many communications, Sunset Shadow never talked about this. In the beginning, Deep Dream always felt that Sunset Shadow's character was most in line with Sai City's concept of standing aloof from the world. But as they worked together for a long time, she could clearly feel the silent obsession in her partner's heart. As for what this obsession was, Deep Dream still didn't know until today. In terms of strength, Deep Dream was confident that she could beat Sunset Shadow by a little bit, but she knew very well that in terms of status in Sai City, she was one level lower than Sunset Shadow. Before Li Tianlan appeared, Tribulation was the deputy governor of Sai City. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud were known as the twin pillars of Sai City. If nothing changed after Situ Tsangyue, the position of governor would definitely fall on Tribulation. But the candidate for deputy governor was not Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, but Sunset Shadow. He was the only candidate. This alone was enough to show his importance in the hearts of Situ Tsangyue and Tribulation. Even if Li Tianlan became the young governor of Sai City now, after some changes that Sai City didn't want to see, Sunset Shadow would still become one of the most important figures in Sai City. Therefore, when Situ Tsangyue imparted the Myriad Daos collection to the two of them, she also taught Sunset Shadow the other half of a unique skill. This seal was called immortality. But even Situ Tsangyue couldn't figure out the artistic conception and force exertion method in this half move, so for many years she had only mastered this half move. This half style symbolized power, status, and responsibility. Deep Dream didn't know how terrifying this half move of immortality was. But for many years, Situ Tsangyue, who had been in the invincible realm and even entered the divine list, couldn't figure out the half move. It itself had a kind of power that no one dared to underestimate. This move was definitely not weaker than their combined move, Myriad Daos Collect. In fact, it might even be stronger. The Myriad Dao all-encompassing net required the two of them to work together, but Sunset Shadow was activating half of the Undying Seal alone. What would the result be? Above the ninth heaven, wind and thunder surged. Violent winds and lightning filled the entire battlefield. Wind Ghost had already gone all out. Li Tianlan's figure could not land in the gale. Wind Ghost's sword and the lightning met in the air. Every time he chopped, a large piece of lightning penetrated the gale. Thunder rolled high in the sky and the thunder was like rain or waterfall. In an instant, Li Tianlan's figure was drowned in it, like a divine punishment. Flesh and blood splattered in the air. Li Tianlan had no choice but to resist in silence. But Sunset Shadow, who was not far away, looked more and more determined. The half of the Undying Seal had been completed. The figure of the Big Dipper seemed to be suspended in the vacuum, floating uncontrollably, struggling in vain. But the body of Wind Ghost was still in the air in his sight. Thousands of sword lights poured down wildly, bringing a lot of blood. A trace of regret flashed through Sunset Shadow's eyes. His emotions seemed to be a little complicated in a trance. The world-shaking unique skill of Jifeng Sword Raining School was known as the fiercest and most violent unique skill of sword intent in the Dark World. The last leader of Jifeng Sword Raining School had a decisive battle with an invincible realm expert many years ago, and this move had blossomed with unparalleled light. That decisive battle took place about 20 years ago. It was one of the shortest decisive battles of the invincible realm in recent decades. At that time, the leader of Jifeng Sword Raining School only used 2 moves. The first move was the most basic Fierce Wind Cut. After the Fierce Wind Cut, the invincible realm expert was directly swept into the sky by the wind, and then he was greeted by Jifeng Sword Raining School. From beginning to end in less than a minute, the sword intent poured down wildly, layer upon layer, like a surging river. The invincible realm expert lost his balance and was chopped to death in the air without even fighting back. And that battle did not help the Grandmaster of Jifeng Sword Raining School, but the reputation of this world-shaking unique skill. Of course, the unique skill of Jifeng Sword Raining School was not invincible. The most important thing was to avoid the wind brought by the fierce wind cut. All the unique skills of Jifeng Sword Raining School needed the help of wind to exert their greatest power. How could they control the sword when there was no wind? But now the Big Dipper launched a sneak attack regardless of his identity. Li Tianlan was directly swept into the air by the wind, and Wind Ghost controlled the sword in person. In such a situation, any expert under the half-step invincible realm could only fight with brute force. This was a young heavenly son who had been invested too much hope and obsession by Sai City. How could Sunset Shadow let him fight with brute force? How could he bear to let him fight with brute force? A touch of blue suddenly flashed in Sunset Shadow's resolute and clear eyes, and the half-style of the undying seal in his hand suddenly shook. Heaven and earth fell silent in an instant. With Sunset Shadow as the center, a circle of air waves visible to the naked eye suddenly rose in the forest. The air waves spread rapidly and suddenly filled the forest for hundreds of meters. The wind stopped. The lightning disappeared. Not far away, the flames were extinguished and the sword light stopped. Deep Dream's scream stopped abruptly. She opened her mouth, but she could not make any sound. The world was silent. At this moment, the area with a radius of hundreds of meters suddenly became the purest vacuum. She could not attack, move, or breathe. All her movements were completely frozen, and then she floated up. Invincible Realm. It was not a pseudo-domain but a real domain of the invincible realm. Whether it was the Big Dipper or Wind Ghost, there was only fear in their eyes. The unique skill of Jifeng Sword Raining School was completely shattered by the vacuum. The moment the Big Dipper lost control of his body, Sunset Shadow shot out from his domain. All the bones in his body were shattering amidst the violent vibrations, turning into dust and powder. But his eyes were still calm. In an almost eternal moment, he looked at Li Tianlan. There was relief, emotion and sigh in his eyes. His name was Sunset Shadow, but none of the people present knew him. His surname was also Li. They didn't need to know. Li Tianji. In the last afterglow of his life, Sunset Shadow murmured his name and rushed directly to the Big Dipper, whose eyes were filled with horror. The vacuum shook wildly. The center of the collision between the two shone with brilliant and dazzling lightning. Wherever the light passed, everything turned into dust. The bodies of the Big Dipper and Sunset Shadow disappeared completely, leaving only a large amount of dust floating in the air. Shadow. Deep Dream's shrill scream finally rang out. The word sunset was cut off before the void was formed, so the last word sounded extremely shrill. The vacuum dissipated. Li Tianlan, who suddenly fell, ignored the blood all over his body and instantly leaped over Wind Ghost. Wind Ghost, who moved almost at the same time as him, suddenly raised his head. The sword edge whistled. Fierce wind cut. A violent gust of wind blew toward Li Tianlan along with the raised sword edge. Li Tianlan had been prepared. His figure flashed and directly switched places with the shadow. The bright and dazzling light bloomed directly on the edge of the human emperor sword in his hands, and the killing intent was overwhelming. Wind Ghost turned around abruptly. In his sight, Li Tianlan's figure had disappeared. There was only sword shadow in the whole world. Infinite light danced fiercely, accompanied by sparks that were compressed to the extreme. A 100-meter-long giant sword took shape directly in the light. The sword edge vibrated, and the giant sword, like a phantom, crossed the distance of dozens of meters and instantly appeared in front of Wind Ghost. The sword edge could break everything. Wind Ghost had no time to react at all, and the sword edge, which was several meters high, directly hit his chest. The giant sword moved forward, carrying Wind Ghost's body directly across the sky hundreds of meters high. The infinite sword intent completely tore his body apart, and sparks burst out, directly burning his body into ashes. This was not a unique technique belonging to the Li family. An extreme outbreak. This was the unique technique of the Wang family of Beihai. Sword of Emperor Path. Li Tianlan had landed. His expression was still calm and his aura was weak, but his eyes were unprecedentedly bright. The sharpness that he had restrained to the extreme burst out of his body without reservation. At this moment, Li Tianlan's every move was with a kind of blazing, almost dazzling style, almost perfect. The giant sword leaped and disappeared in the air. In the deep pit that was blasted out by the sword, an incredible scream suddenly rang out. Dongqing Rushi's figure rushed out of the sky again. Heavenly Fairy. An expert of the thunder-shocking realm of Jifeng sword raining school staggered out of the deep pit, and fell to the ground after just 2 steps. In his chest, a scarlet crystal-clear dagger was slightly trembling, and the hilt, which was carved with countless complicated golden patterns, was full of blood. Lovesickness was stained with blood. At the same time, under the night sky at Changdao International Airport, a beautiful woman in white whose age could not be guessed walked out of the airport hall with some cold people. She wore a long white dress, a green bracelet, a long sword on her back and a dagger on her waist. The simple dress was obvious at a glance, but there was a sense of unreal beauty and illusion. The woman walked quietly with empty and numb eyes, like a lifeless walking corpse. The airport was heavily guarded. Countless soldiers and elites of the special warfare system were patrolling and searching in the airport. Once they found anything suspicious, they would intercept it immediately. The woman in white walked past a pair of special policemen as if there was no one else around. The faint fragrance wafted in the air. The special policemen sniffed subconsciously and looked around blankly, but they saw nothing. A number of luxury buses were parked in front of the airport hall, and on the screen on the wall was a map of the whole territory of East Island. The woman stood in front of the door and looked up. In her sight, every city on the map of East Island appeared in front of her. She stood quietly and her eyes wandered. Quietly she stopped in the Ninghu area. The woman's empty and numb eyes suddenly had a little more fluctuation, like a dream, with a kind of mistiness that could make all living things fall. Time passed slowly. The gloomy night was still the same. After a long time the woman moved. She took a deep look at the Ninghu area and turned around silently. Her snow-white hand subconsciously grasped the dagger hanging on her waist. It was a scarlet dagger that was almost crystal clear. It was gorgeous and exquisite, with fine and elegant golden patterns spreading over the dagger. It looked complicated and mysterious. The woman grasped the dagger tightly. Her originally weak body seemed to have gained a little more strength, and her walking pace also became slightly faster. While walking, she took off the dagger, put it in front of her eyes and pulled it out of the scabbard. The fine golden patterns on the scarlet and transparent blade were more complicated and elegant. Near the hilt, 2 deep traditional Chinese characters were still as clear as yesterday, even after so many years. Forgetting each other. Yearning and forgetting each other, the woman's eyes were blurred and dazed and eventually became completely empty and numb. She put away the dagger and walked straight ahead without looking back. She couldn't look back because she had no choice. This was Changdao. From the moment she set foot on this land, or perhaps even before, she already knew that in this life, she would have to apologize to a second person for the second time. The sky was quiet and the sky was full of stars. The night was long. In the darkest time of the night, the dawn was approaching. There was night. Chapter 215. Even nonentities had their own pursuits. There was no absolute detachment from worldly affairs in this world. Times were changing, things were changing, the general trend was rising and falling, and the storm was turbulent. In the secular world, as long as one was alive, there would be more or less right and wrong in cause and effect. The biggest difference was nothing more than the distance from right and wrong. The Lin clan in Switzerland, a family that was extremely strange to most experts, was undoubtedly the farthest family from right and wrong in the dark world. For hundreds of years, this family, which clearly had the power to turn the world upside down in the general trend, was willing to keep a low profile, and had been living in an ordinary city in Switzerland, far away from right and wrong, quietly watching the ups and downs of the dark world. They had always existed but almost never existed. This was a life that most people could not understand. It was a life full of absolute freedom, carefree, neither advancing nor retreating. When a family had money that could not be spent for hundreds or thousands of years, and they did not care about power and status. What else could they do in their daily lives? Apart from eating, drinking, and playing, it seemed that there was only eating, drinking, and playing. The Lin clan was a very strange family. It was very large and also very small. Hundreds of years of inheritance had given birth to one branch after another in this family, and these branches decreased one by one with the passage of time. But this was not because they were destroyed by others, but because the Lin clan was constantly divided within itself. For hundreds of years, even the patriarch of the Lin clan did not know how much money he had. This kind of life of squandering and doing nothing at will was not liked by everyone. Over time, in this kind of overly comfortable environment, some incredible things would naturally happen. Some people in the Lin clan loved to travel. In the last generation, there was a couple from a side branch who left the Lin clan to travel with their 6-year-old child. Then the travel became a trip and they left for decades. It was not until 3 years ago that they returned to Switzerland. Some people in the Lin clan loved to collect, so they built a collection museum with their own money. Decades later, the collection museum had become a magical place that was comparable to any large museum in the world. Some people in the Lin clan liked to do business. Some people in the Lin clan liked to fight for hegemony. This was a family that had never had any differences. The so-called side branches and direct descendants were completely equal in the Lin clan. It was no exaggeration to say that everyone in this family could do whatever they wanted when they were really bored. Money? Yes. They could get as much as they wanted and give them whenever they wanted. The wealth that everyone liked really became waste paper that could be wasted at will here. These waste papers contained the ambitions and hobbies of generations of the Lin clan, which made the Lin clan constantly divided. It was division. The Lin clan never entered the secular world, but they did not oppose entering it either. Generation after generation of the Lin clan continued to develop, and the restless guys in each generation would get enough money and shelter to leave the Lin clan to expand in the outside world. The people of the Lin clan were all over the world, forming one Lin family after another. Today, the Lin family, which had split off hundreds of years ago, had already cut off all ties with the Lin clan in Switzerland. It could even be said that they were two different forces. Only some of the branches that had split off in the past 100 years understood that they came from the same place. They supported each other and continued to grow. At the same time, they maintained almost no connection with the Lin clan. A few people noticed this. So in their eyes, the Lin clan or the Lin clan alliance which developed in the outside world, was the Lin clan. But only a few people knew that these were just the branches that had split off from the Lin clan, and the real Lin clan had always been in Switzerland, in the Worry-Free Villa at the foot of Worry-Free Mountain in Switzerland. Worry-Free Mountain was located in the northeast of Geneva, with a radius of 50 miles. It was the property of the Lin clan. Worry-Free Villa was said to be a villa, but in fact, it was comparable to an exquisite and prosperous small city. The scenery was pleasant, magnificent, and charming. It could be said to be a real worry-free place. As a member of the Lin clan, as long as he didn't want to think too much, everyone could indeed be carefree for the rest of his life. But as the patriarch of the Lin clan, as the real core figure of the Lin clan, could he really be carefree in his long life? At 9 o'clock in the morning, the quiet and tranquil Wolf-Free Heights gradually regained its vitality. When the bored and free people of the Lin clan began to enjoy a new day, a helicopter slowly rose into the sky with the whistling sound of the rotors, bathed in the sunshine of the new day and quickly went away. Lin Fengting, who had returned from Zhongzhou State with his daughter for only a few months, sat in the specially modified cabin and silently looked at the scenery outside the window. His expression was soft, but there was a touch of contemplation in his eyes. "Is the news accurate?" Very abruptly, he opened his mouth and asked. His voice was steady and casual, but there was an obvious seriousness and even solemnity in his words. "It's accurate." Sitting opposite Lin Fengting was a young man in his 20s. He was slender, and his face was 70% similar to Lin Fengting's. They were both handsome and tough. He wore a white casual suit and sat quietly opposite Lin Fengting. He was soft and warm, without any aggression. He looked at Lin Fengting with undisguised intimacy in his eyes. "Dad, I've seen it myself. There is indeed a sword mark that I feel is very familiar at the scene, and there are also traces left by a murderous weapon. It's just that the area is too desolate. For the time being, we can't determine the time when the battle took place, but it was at least 3 years ago." Lin Fengting nodded. The light in his eyes was deep and calm. "Is it the Shadow the Ripper?" The Shadow the Ripper. It was one of the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World. It was also the only murderous weapon whose specific trace could not be determined in the Dark World in recent years. 30 years ago, the Shadow the Ripper once belonged to India, a superpower of Heng state. At that time, the ruler of India, Long Xiang, an expert of the invincible realm, had the heavenly king heart and the exquisite bone. He was known as the first expert of Heng state, holding the Shadow the Ripper, and had the ambition to conquer all of Asia. However, India invaded Zhongzhou state at its most glorious time. At that time, Li Honghe, the god of war of Zhongzhou state, took action in person, and the 24 moves of sword of the Li family roared on the border. The battle lasted a day and a night from Zhongzhou state directly to Heng state. Li Honghe entered Heng state alone, chased for more than 400 miles, and finally killed Long Xiang, the first expert of Heng state. The murderous weapon, the Shadow the Ripper, disappeared from that day until today. Lin Fengting and the Lin clan themselves did not have much interest in the Shadow the Ripper. However, 19 years ago, with the destruction of the Li family, Li Guangtu's treason, and the destruction of the Li family's murderous weapon, the Infinite Sky, a trace of obsession gradually appeared in the Lin clan. Since Lin Fengting took charge of the Lin clan, he had been investigating clues about the Shadow the Ripper. The conflict with the Vatican a few years ago was mostly because of this reason. However, there were too many rumors about this murderous weapon, true and false. Lin Fengting searched many times but found nothing. However, in his heart, this had become an obsession, so he had never given up for many years. It was not until yesterday that the Lin clan's branches in the outside world finally locked a trace of the Shadow the Ripper again. Lin Yuxian, Lin Fengting's eldest son, rushed to the scene to investigate in person. As a result, he accidentally found another sword mark that felt very familiar to him. Lin Yuxian rushed back to Warefree Heights overnight and told Lin Fengting about it. Then, without any delay, the father and son took a helicopter to the border between Switzerland and Germany again. Most murderous weapons have owners. Every time they move, there will be intelligence from all sides, but there is no news at the border this time. It should not belong to any murderous weapon that has an owner now, so it is very likely to be the Shadow the Ripper. Father, you have to see it in person to be sure. Lin Yuxian shook his head, hesitated, and told the truth. Lin Fengting nodded, looked at his eldest son whose eyes were red and said softly, "You've worked hard. Are you tired these 2 days?" "I'm fine." Lin Yuxian shook his head and said, "Dad, don't scold me for being a good-for-nothing. I really feel good now. When you came back from Zhongzhou state, it was the easiest time for me." Lin Fengting was silent for a while, but he still couldn't help laughing and scolding, "You are really good for nothing." Lin Yuxian smiled, but his eyes were a little dazed. He said softly, "If I have time, I really want to see Tianlan. He replaced my position. Wrong?" Lin Fengting waved his hand and said faintly, "That is his position. If you go, you will be the real replacement. Your position is the patriarch of the Lin clan. You can't forget this." "Yes." Lin Yuxian's expression changed, and he agreed seriously. "Yuxian, you must remember. The whole Lin clan could forget about their worries, but as the patriarch he could forget everything except for his worries. It is naturally hard for Tianlan to revive the Li family, but you will be carrying the whole Lin clan in the future. Isn't it hard?" Lin Fengting's eyes were calm and vicissitudes of life. He said softly, "The word patriarch itself is hard." Chapter 216. What Lin Fengting said was an irrefutable fact, so Lin Yuxian had nothing to say. His parents named him Yuxian, but they did not want him to be carefree all his life. The greater the power, the higher the status, and the stronger the strength, the greater the responsibility. This was a universal truth, and it was also applicable within the Lin clan. The headquarters of the Lin clan stood aloof from worldly affairs and were carefree, but none of the collateral branches that split from the headquarters was bad. Although the major branches had little contact with the headquarters, there was cause and effect between them after all. They were of the same origin. Something really happened, the Lin clan could not just stand by and watch. How to ensure the prosperity of the collateral branches when the headquarters did not care about worldly affairs was a problem that tested every generation of the patriarch of the Lin clan for hundreds of years. It tested the wisdom of dealing with the world and also tested the world-shaking strength. As a patriarch, how could he forget his worries? Power was the greatest right and wrong. "My sister." Lin Yuxian looked at Lin Fengting and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. This was indeed a young man who did not seem to be aggressive at all. Even when he talked about some sensitive things, he was still calm and gentle like a piece of clear water without ripples. "She is a girl. If it is not a last resort, who is willing to stand in front of the stage? It is best to live a peaceful and steady life." Lin Fengting was silent for a while and shook his head. He seemed to think of something and suddenly said with a smile, "If things don't change, I was going to find a wife for you. She is 2 years younger than you. After a few years she will also be an outstanding beauty. She may not be worse than the one in Samsara Palace. If you go back to Zhongzhou State, maybe it will be a good story. It's a pity that Li Tianlan got it first." Lin Yuxian did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said helplessly, "Are you talking about Wang Yuatong? Last time before you went to Zhongzhou State, you seemed to show me her photo. It is really a pity. Are you very envious? Do you regret it?" Lin Fengting's eyes were soft. He leaned on the sofa with a relaxed body and looked at his son with a smile. "I regret it so much that my intestines are blue." Lin Yuxian patted his thigh and laughed. Although he was talking about regret and pity, the eyes of the young master of the Lin clan were full of sincerity. His smile slowly faded. He looked at his father sitting in front of him, hesitated for a moment and then said softly, "But Tianlan is not me. Even if Wang Yuatong appears by his side, can she really affect the overall situation? In other words, can Wang Yuatong really stay with Tianlan in the end?" "What are you trying to say?" Lin Fengting's tone was calm. "I mean, can we intervene a little? Maybe Uncle Wang?" Lin Yuxian's tone was cautious and vague. "I can't." Lin Fengting shook his head without hesitation. "The Lin clan doesn't care about worldly affairs. This matter involves too much. How can we interfere? Let Tianlan join the Lin clan? Let's not talk about whether we're willing or not, even he himself would probably reject it." Lin Yuxian was silent and lost in thought. "We owe the Li family a sword. If we can find clues about the Shadow the Ripper this time, I will give the Shadow the Ripper and divine punishment to Tianlan to settle the karma. The rest is up to him." Lin Fengting's tone was calm and firm. Lin Yuxian took a deep look at his father and nodded, but he thought of many years ago. In the year when the Li family was destroyed, he was still an ignorant child and could not remember his father's attitude when he learned the news. But it seemed that from that year on, the Lin clan began to secretly pursue the news of the Shadow the Ripper. How important were the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World? It was the power of the invincible realm. When it was fired with all its strength, it was equivalent to a full blow from an invincible realm expert. Such a murderous weapon could be said to be a treasure related to the fate of the country and one of the greatest deterrents in the Dark World. The 11 murderous weapons had a clear owner. The Lin clan did not want to enter the secular world to participate in disputes, so they could only track down the whereabouts of the missing Shadow the Ripper. When Lin Yuxian was 13 years old, he began to get involved in the secret affairs of the Lin clan bit by bit. It was also that year that in the chat between father and son, Lin Fengting said intentionally or unintentionally, "In any case, the foundation and glory left by our ancestors can't disappear in vain." At that time Lin Yuxian was still young, but he also vaguely sensed something through this sentence. Lin Yuxian officially stepped into the fire-flaming realm at the age of 18. That year, the Lin clan accidentally got the news about the Shadow the Ripper. Several branches took action in person, but in the end, it was proved that the news was not true. The Lin clan did not get the murderous weapon. But that year Lin Fengting made formal arrangements for Lin Yuxian and his sister Lin Chuxue. The foundation and glory of our ancestors could not disappear in vain. Since the Li family was destroyed, Lin Yuxian should split from the Lin clan, return to Zhongzhou State and rebuild Zhuanyuantai. And Lin Chuxue would be responsible for the affairs of the Lin clan in the future. A few years passed and there was no news from the Shadow the Ripper. Lin Yuxian, who was nearly 24 years old, officially stepped into the thunder-shocking realm a few months ago. He did not have the wind and thunder veins, the heavenly king heart, or the exquisite bone, but his real combat capability was no less than any young heavenly son. A few months ago Lin Fengting revisited Zhongzhou State with his daughter. It seemed to be a trip, but he suddenly contacted Wang Tianzong after not contacting the Wang family of Beihai for more than a decade. At that time he really wanted to matchmake Lin Yuxian and Wang Yuatong. The Lin clan and the Wang family of Beihai had been friends for generations. The ancestors of the Lin clan founded Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun, which was strongly supported by the ancestors of the Wang family of Beihai. Later the Lin clan left Zhongzhou State and passed the supreme power of Zhuanyuantai to their disciple, the Li family. For hundreds of years, the Li family had been the closest comrade of the Wang family of Beihai. Although the Li family was destroyed, the friendship between the Lin clan and the Wang family of Beihai still existed. Moreover, if the Lin clan counted the branches, even the Wang family of Beihai had to pay attention to its strength. With Lin Fengting, once Lin Yuxian returned to Zhongzhou State to rebuild Zhuanyuantai, at least the Wang family of Beihai would not object. If Lin Yuxian and Wang Yuatong were to marry, Wang Tianzong would even give some support. Lin Fengting went to Zhongzhou State before to test Wang Tianzong's attitude. This was also Lin Fengting's pursuit and obsession for many years. The glory of Zhuanyuantai of Zhongzhou State and the god of war family belonged to the Li family as well as the Lin clan. If the Li family was destroyed, the Lin clan would certainly not stand idly by. Lin Fengting would rather let his own son split from the headquarters to make Zhuanyuantai reappear in Zhongzhou State, which was enough to show his determination. However, before he talked about this topic with Wang Tianzong, Li Tianlan and the Samsara Palace appeared. The Li family had a successor. Under such circumstances, Lin Fengting naturally did not want his son to continue to be involved in the muddy water of Zhongzhou State, so he directly withdrew. He did not even mention the matter of Lin Yuxian. Presumably, Wang Tianzong was still confused about what he wanted to do in Zhongzhou State. Lin Fengting suddenly smiled and said slowly, "The Li family and the Lin clan are of the same origin. In the future, when you all settle down, you might as well make friends with Tianlan." Lin Yuxian replied with a hum. The appearance of Li Tianlan directly replaced his position in the future. Without him, it might be him who was fighting in East Island now. Lin Yuxian knew this very well. Moreover, the Li family had a successor which could make the Lin clan more comfortable in adjusting the power inheritance in the clan. It was not that Lin Chuxue was not good enough, but in contrast, Lin Yuxian was more suitable for this position. However, Lin Yuxian and Li Tianlan were different after all. If he went to Zhongzhou State, it was almost certain that he would marry Wang Yuatong and rebuild Zhuanyuantai. At least, he would not encounter resistance from the Wang family of Beihai. Whether the new Zhuanyuantai would join the Southeast group again or not, Wang Tianzong would not be a villain. Because the Lin clan was not surnamed Li after all. Not to mention how powerful the Lin clan was, even the old subordinates of Old Master Li Honghe who were still in the Southeast group would not necessarily agree with the new Zhuanyuantai of the Lin clan. But if it was Li Tianlan, it was completely different. Could he and Wang Yuatong be together? Even if they were forced to be together, it would not affect the overall situation. Tianlan's future situation is not very good, is it? Lin Yuxian said hesitantly. Not too bad. After all, there is Samsara Palace. That Qin Weibai of Samsara Palace is really a smart person. I can't be sure now, but in this final battle of Changdao, there must be something fishy inside. Samsara and Zhongzhou State may not advance or retreat together. It's really uncertain who will be the winner after this final battle. But this is also good. I think they also understand that if they want to protect Li Tianlan, it may not be a good thing to keep too close to Zhongzhou State. A Samsara Palace with an ambiguous position outside Zhongzhou State can fight for more space for Li Tianlan. In front of his son, Lin Fengting was extremely talkative. After all, there were few things in this world that could be learned by oneself. The so-called wisdom could also be inherited. Being influenced by what one saw and heard over the years was the most direct way of inheritance. Lin Yuxian seemed to be thinking and almost said to himself, "Who is the master of Samsara Palace?" Lin Fengting's face suddenly became dignified. The master of Samsara Palace was an extremely powerful figure. This year she was even more outstanding. She destroyed Night Spirit, killed Tian Xin, took the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld, defeated Gu Xingyun and set off the final battle of Changdao. Everything that happened in the Dark World this year had a great relationship with her. No one could take such a figure lightly. This is also the question I want to know. Lin Fengting said softly, "With her strength, I'm afraid she may not be worse than my second brother. This person is definitely related to the Li family, but it seems that she is also related to Kunlun City. The 24 moves of sword and the 10th unique domain are actually concentrated on her. It's incredible. She's really a mystery." Recently, the Lin clan has also been looking for the news of the master of Samsara Palace, but they have found nothing. This person is too low-key, as if she doesn't exist. There is no trace of her. Lin Yuxian gave a wry smile, spread his hands and joked, If Qin Weibai is 10 years older, I even think she is the master of Samsara Palace." Lin Fengting dismissed it with a smile. This assumption was not even speculation, and there was no factual basis at all. Not to mention that Qin Weibai didn't know martial arts. Even if she really hid her strength, it was impossible for her to master the power of the invincible realm at the age of more than 20. The Lin clan had a long history, and they did know some extreme methods that could make people barely reach the thundershocking realm in their early 20s. But the power of the invincible realm was several times stronger than that of the thundershocking realm. It was impossible to reach the invincible realm at the age of 20, not to mention in reality even in theory. This person may be one of the hidden pawns left by Senior Lee, or even my second brother's sister. Anyway, we should pay more attention. And we can see the specific clues soon. Lin Fengting said lightly. Lin Yuxian was stunned, and then he realized and said, "That sword mark?" Lin Fengting nodded. The sword mark that makes you feel familiar but can't tell the reason can only be left by a superior of the invincible realm, and it is likely to be the unique skill of Zhuanyuantai. It is very likely that the person who forced the Shadow the Ripper to fire at the border a few years ago was the master of Samsara Palace. I just don't know which sword move she used at that time. His eyes were a little blank, and he thought of the moment when the master of Samsara Palace and Wang Tianzong were about to fight for life and death. On Mount Dibbing, Lin Fengting could be sure that the sword move of the master of Samsara Palace was the 15th blade, Samsara. But to this day he was still not sure which superior of Zhuanyuantai's sword intent she reincarnated. The helicopter began to land in the roar. Below was a mountain range. Half of the mountain range belonged to Switzerland, and the other half belonged to Germany. This was the borderland. In the sound of the rotor turning, Lin Fengting and Lin Yuxian walked out of the cabin. Lin Yuxian led the way in person. They advanced 800 meters. Before Lin Yuxian could speak, Lin Fengting's footsteps had stopped. The hard and solid ground under his feet suddenly became soft and scattered in front of him, and a huge trace of thousands of meters long appeared abruptly. The trace spread from the ground, smashed the rocks, rushed up the hillside, and directly imprinted on a mountain in front with an unstoppable momentum. Everything along the way seemed to be torn into powder. That battle seemed to be a long time ago, but even now the trace was still clear, and the torn land and rocks still had no sparks. Lin Fengting looked solemn and moved forward along the trace. The soft ground was slightly deformed under his feet, but it returned to its original state the moment he lifted his foot. In the blink of an eye they were 1,000 meters away. Lin Fengting's figure approached the mountain at the end of the trace. Looking up, the continuous trace went all the way up the mountain. The trace, which was tens of meters wide, became narrower as it went up, which was a sign that the power was condensing and condensing along the way. At the end of the trace, there was a gully deeply engraved into the mountain. The gully was tens of meters long. In terms of length, it was far from the trace left by the murderous weapon, but it had a kind of power that almost smashed the whole mountain into powder. Sword trace. Lin Fengting's pupils suddenly contracted. His body suddenly rose, and the next second he came directly in front of the sword trace. The sword trace was quietly engraved on the mountain. The original sword intent and sword energy rushed into the mountain, leaving a narrow but deep gap. Every tiny cut in the sword trace and every engraving mark became clearer and clearer in Lin Fengting's eyes, but his eyes gradually became dazed. Absolute sword, Lin Fengting muttered to himself. At this moment he even completely ignored the trace left by the murderous weapon. Absolute sword? Which sword? Lin Yuxian's expression changed dramatically. Absolute sword was a specific name in Zhuanyuantai's martial arts. It referred to the most powerful sword moves in Zhuanyuantai's martial arts. The core of martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai was outbreak, and the core of martial arts of Zhuanyuantai was broken. In the 24 moves of sword, all the sword moves with the word broken could be called absolute sword. However, most of those sword moves belonged to the domain of the invincible manual. Lin Fengting's eyes became more dazed, with hesitation. In any case, he did not expect that the sword trace he saw here would be like this. This sword trace was indeed the absolute sword. But it was not any of the known absolute swords. In this sword trace, Lin Fengting saw something familiar and strange. This was the half of the absolute sword. It was also the last move of the 24 moves of sword. 24 moves, break of reincarnation. It was a move of the absolute sword created by the ancestors to restrain the 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. However, this half of the absolute sword seemed to have been completely completed and had broken away from the original sword intent. The power of the several absolute swords of Zhuanyuantai was almost the same. Even the break of reincarnation was only aimed at the unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, and its power was not much stronger than the other moves. But the completed sword in front of him was vaguely the sublimation of the 24 moves of sword, and its power was simply unimaginable. This could even be said to be the 25 moves of sword created with the help of the half of the 24 moves of sword. Lin Fengting's eyes were complicated and confused. The half of the 24 moves of sword had always existed in the Lin clan for hundreds of years before. Even the Li family had not mastered it. If this sword move was left by the master of Samsara Palace, who was she? If the master of Samsara Palace had nothing to do with the Li family, but she had mastered the 24 moves of sword, then the most likely possibility was that she was from the Lin clan. Especially the completed half of the absolute sword that even the Li family could not master, it proved something invisibly. Did she have the same idea as him to support Li Tianlan? On the cold mountain peak, Lin Fengting slowly landed on the ground. Continued to track down the whereabouts of the murderous weapon. Lin Fengting suddenly said, "Put the matter of the master of Samsara Palace aside for the time being." Okay. Lin Yuxian responded. Looking at his father who was about to leave, he asked subconsciously, "Dad, where are you going?" "I'm going to Zhongzhou State." Chapter 217. Changdao, which had been quiet for many days, finally started to be chaotic. The chaos lasted from night to day. After days of depression, the city, which was now a battlefield, finally started to be noisy. An investigation that was thought to be very common. An encirclement and suppression that was thought to be easy. The running and fighting that lasted for a night directly broke the stalemate that had been in Changdao for many days. Zhongzhou State, East Island, and the other superpowers in Changdao never thought that in the late night of the third day and the early morning of the fourth day, the approaching final battle would directly open the curtains. The sleepless night ushered in the sun, but inside the battlefield of Changdao, a storm was brewing. Teams of elites from Zhongzhou State left the club one after another. Thousands of people from Zhongzhou State almost filled the 3 defense zones overnight. Search. East Island reacted almost immediately. The troops that were still on the road sped up their gathering speed, and the elites of the special warfare system also came out from their hiding places in batches. In the general trend, experts of the invincible realm were like non-entities. But similarly, in the general trend, the 2 opposing sides or even many parties had important figures that they had to protect or kill. For example, Wang Xingxiao of the Wang family of Beihai. For example, Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City. Another example was Li Tianlan, the young master of Sai City. In the eyes of real experts, they were the future heavenly sons, the future figures of the invincible realm. But from another perspective, the future figures of the invincible realm meant that they were nothing now. After all, they were still too young. They needed killing and experience, and they needed to grow in blood and fire. In the final battle driven by the general trend, they were at most an opportunity, a very important opportunity. The combat capability of the 3 of them was not the top now, but any one of them had the value of changing, or even reversing the general trend. Wang Xingxiao was the future patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, and probably the future number 1 on the divine list. If something happened to him, the Wang family of Beihai would not ignore it. Kunlun City had only risen in Zhongzhou State for about 20 years. Gu Hanshan, who had the heavenly king heart, was one of the most important figures for them to stabilize their power. He was also enough to change the position of Kunlun City. Li Tianlan was backed by Sai City and Samsara Palace. If Li Tianlan fell into the hands of East Island, these 2 superpowers, at least Samsara Palace, would definitely be threatened by East Island. In this final battle, these 3 people must be protected by Zhongzhou State, and they must be fought for by East Island. As long as any one of them was captured alive, they could reverse a considerable part of the passive situation. Li Tianlan's appearance made everyone see an important opportunity. No one expected such a figure to appear in an ordinary investigation before the final battle. The moment his trace was confirmed, the news about him was almost immediately passed to Shinichi Miyamoto, the leader of the Divine Wind Force. Then came the encirclement. For the first time, Changdao, which had been peaceful for many days, had fights, conflicts, and chaos. East Island was chasing. Zhongzhou State was rescuing them. In just one night, the 2 sides had fought more than a dozen times in different areas. But whether they should take advantage of this opportunity and directly fight to the death when the final battle began, neither Zhongzhou State nor East Island had made up their minds. However, the slaughter had already broken out. How could it be easy for them to live in harmony? He was in a dilemma. For the first time, Shinichi Miyamoto began to feel troubled. If he was given one more day, he would be able to fully prepare everything and then launch the final battle. At that time, on the land of Changdao, he would not be afraid of anyone or any opponent. But just one day later, the opportunity for the final battle suddenly appeared. And this opportunity was Li Tianlan. Right now, Li Tianlan was definitely one of the most crucial figures in this final battle. All the signs showed that this young heavenly son, who appeared in Zhongzhou State a few months ago, had attracted the interest of several superpowers. Not to mention Sai City and Samsara Palace behind him, even the attitudes of the Jiang family of South America and Knights Templars were unclear. One wanted to kill him directly, and the other wanted to capture him alive. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't know what they were planning, but he was very clear that as long as he could control Li Tianlan, it would definitely be good for East Island's current passive situation. If it was Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan who showed up this time, Shinichi Miyamoto could grit his teeth and suppress his impulse. But Li Tianlan's appearance made him hesitate. It was such a rare opportunity, it would be a pity not to make a move. But if he made a move, he was not well prepared now. Although he only had one day, the entire battle of Changdao would last only 7 days. When the final battle started, all the superpowers of the Dark World would get involved. One day was enough to bring too many variables. The sun shone on every corner of the mountain, and the hot light shone on the low hillside. The military tents gradually reflected the dazzling light. Shinichi Miyamoto stood in front of his tent, watching the darkness turn into light in his sight. He was motionless like a statue. This was the temporary headquarters of the final battle in East Island. They didn't station themselves in some places with people. Instead, they chose a low hill with few people and pitched tents one after another on the hill. In this final battle of East Island, 80% of the most powerful elites were here. And Shinichi Miyamoto, the palace master of Liuhua Palace and the leader of the Divine Wind Force, the only superior of the Invincible Realm in East Island, had also been here since the first day. The final battle was approaching, and Shinichi Miyamoto's state of mind was getting calmer and calmer. But Li Tianlan's news disturbed his mind. He had been standing here all night, but the hesitation in his heart was still surging. What do you think? Under the sun, Shinichi Miyamoto, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly opened his mouth. He was dressed in a gray ninja costume and even his face was covered. He was like a shadow in the daytime, vague and illusory. Li Tianlan must be controlled by us. This is an absolutely good opportunity and it's fleeting. Your Highness, we can't hesitate. Tianyu, the high priest of ISE Grand Shrine, made his position clear immediately. He was seriously injured in the battle against Li Baidian, Dongqing Rushi, and others in the capital city, and he hadn't fully recovered yet. But right now his tone was firm, even resolute. This person is indeed very important in this battle. It's not only about the internal affairs of Zhongzhou State, but also about the Samsara Palace. He's a key figure and we should take the initiative. Heavenly Hound, the left advisor of Wuji Palace, said in a deep voice. The people present, especially those who could stand in front of Shinichi Miyamoto, were all important figures in the special warfare system of East Island, including the top management of the Divine Wind Force, the giants of the Shinto sect, the left and right advisors of Wuji Palace, and the key figures of Liuhua Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School. In the upcoming final battle, each of them was the most crucial combat capability. If they had the same attitude toward the final battle, their will would even be stronger than Shinichi Miyamoto's own will. What are you worried about, Your Highness? Tide and Glacier asked at the same time. These two superiors of the half-step invincible realm were the left and right guards of the Mikado, and their status was very high. Their questions seemed to represent their position. I'm worried that this is a bait set by Zhongzhou State. Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep breath and said in a low voice, It's such a coincidence that Li Tianlan exposed himself this time. It's an opportunity, but it could also be a trap. Glacier and Tide looked at each other and spoke again at the same time. They said flatly, This is East Island. Shinichi Miyamoto smiled bitterly. This was indeed East Island, but now it was the conflict of the Dark World. A large number of elites of East Island were trapped in Huading, Zhongzhou State. Now their strength was limited and they couldn't use the troops on the periphery. So what if this was East Island? I support the final battle. A clear voice sounded. This is our country. Since we have such a good opportunity, why don't we fight? We're not ready and the others aren't either. Anyway, we have the advantage. Shinichi Miyamoto narrowed his eyes, but he remained calm. It was Crown Prince Ren who spoke. Glacier and Tide, the two superiors from the royal family, had already expressed their stance, so there was no need to ask Crown Prince Ren's position. He forced himself to calm down and suddenly said, Sorry, I need to make a phone call. Under everyone's confused gaze, he walked aside and dialed a number. It wasn't the Mikado or the Prime Minister, but someone outside East Island. Your Highness Miyamoto? On the other side of the phone, a lazy voice sounded with a hint of a smile. What can I do for you? Li Tianlan. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't waste any time and said in a deep voice, he's here. Evil, why don't you make a move? On the phone, the only killer of the invincible realm in the dark world fell silent. After a long time he said flatly, believe it or not, I have to say that I've observed Li Tianlan. I'm only a few hundred meters away from him and he's alone. But I always feel that he's dangerous. At least, I don't have the confidence to kill him now. So I need a chance. Dangerous. Shinichi Miyamoto raised his eyebrows in surprise. Yes, it's dangerous. Evil's tone was solemn, but there was a hint of doubt in it. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't say anything more and hung up the phone without any expression. He stood where he was and after a long silence, he suddenly turned around and said, give the order. The superior of East Island, who was waiting for Shinichi Miyamoto's final decision, suddenly trembled. Catch Li Tianlan at all cost. Shinichi Miyamoto said word by word, even if it's the final battle. He finally agreed with Crown Prince Ren's judgment. 7 days was too short after all. Even if Li Tianlan was the bait and East Island wasn't well prepared, Zhongzhou State wouldn't be well prepared either. In the final battle now they still had the advantage. But what Shinichi Miyamoto didn't know was that Zhongzhou State wasn't well prepared, but Li Tianlan, the bait, wasn't thrown out by Zhongzhou State. If it weren't for a mysterious man's unexpected disruption, Li Tianlan's investigation wouldn't have been exposed. In the final battle now, all the forces exposed to East Island weren't well prepared. But there was a mysterious force that had been waiting for a long time. In the midst of the known and unknown, all the forces of East Island started to take action. The final battle officially broke out. At the same time, in the cold downtown area of Changdao, in front of a suite of a hotel, a man in white clothes and pants pried open the door in front of him. The door was pulled open from the inside, and what appeared in front of the man in white was like a mirror. Inside the room, there were two men with similar appearances and similar temperaments, both dressed in snow-white clothes, standing face to face. They were like mirror images of each other. The man inside the door had a fleeting expression, and his eyes were complicated and confused. The man outside the door was silent, and his eyes were complicated and sad. Daybreak thought. Did things go well? After a short silence, Daybreak, who was standing in the room, took the initiative to speak, and his voice was a little hoarse. Very well. Dawn nodded. More smoothly than I expected. I just killed a superior of the thunder-shocking realm in front of them, and they were exposed. The Big Dipper led people to chase me in person, huh? Your expression seems a little strange. Daybreak was silent for a while, and then he moved aside to let Dawn in. He said slowly, what happened? Dawn's facial muscles twitched. He opened his mouth but didn't speak for a while. What the hell happened? Daybreak raised his eyebrows and his handsome, almost devilish face suddenly looked a little sharp. Tenji. Tenji is dead. Dawn said in a hoarse voice, he died with the Big Dipper. I saw it with my own eyes. Daybreak's pupils contracted instantly. He raised his hand and slapped Dawn's face hard. Why didn't you save him? Daybreak growled and there was undisguised pain in his eyes. His devilish face suddenly became ferocious. If I saved him, I would be exposed. I was sure to defeat the Big Dipper, but I wasn't sure to get out unscathed. Dawn lowered his head and said in a low and dispirited tone, Brother, His Highness will arrive in Changdao in 3 hours. Daybreak gritted his teeth. After a long while, he sighed helplessly and murmured, What does His Highness want to do? Dawn smiled bitterly and didn't speak. The phone suddenly rang. Daybreak took out his phone, looked at the number and immediately answered. He said in a low voice, Your Highness. His Highness has gone to Ninghu. He asked me to tell you to go to Ninghu and meet him after you deal with things in Changdao. On the phone, a cold female voice with endless killing intent rang out. Phoenix? Daybreak shouted in surprise and then frowned. His Highness went to Ninghu? Why did he go to Ninghu at this time? The young master was killed. On the phone, the woman with the code name Phoenix said coldly and then hung up. It was a simple sentence, but it sounded like thunder in Daybreak's ears. It was earth-shattering. Chapter 218. A high-powered off-road vehicle rushed from Changdao to Ninghu at a violent speed. The bright sunshine of Changdao fell far behind the vehicle. It was raining in Ninghu at this time. It was daytime, but the sky was completely covered by gloomy dark clouds. The raindrops kept hitting the car window pitter-patter, and there was a hazy mist on the car window. The windshield wipers kept working. The off-road vehicle didn't slow down at all in the rain. It roared into the downtown area of Ninghu and drove to the suburbs of Ninghu. The roar of the off-road vehicle's engine seemed to be abnormal, but the driver didn't care. The vehicle roared past Ninghu's Wuxia mountain and rushed into a nearby fishing village as if it was taking off from the ground. The village was very small, with a population of 200 or 300, and the permanent population was no more than 100. It was quiet at this time. The off-road vehicle stopped in the middle of the village and the door opened. In just a few hours, Daybreak and Dawn, who arrived in Ninghu at the fastest speed, didn't stop. Like two white shadows, they flashed and rushed directly to the north of the village. The narrow alley in the north of the village was almost full of fishermen, men and women, old and young. The more mature ones more or less had a trace of regret or sadness on their faces. The crowd talked in twos and threes. Under the gloomy sky, the small fishing village near the sea looked more depressing. Daybreak and Dawn's hearts sank to the bottom. Although they had received the news in advance, they couldn't help but feel cold when they saw it with their own eyes. The villagers' discussion was buzzing, clear and vague. Their minds were blank and they walked past the villagers around them in a daze, like walking corpses. Huawu is dead. Yeah, what a pity. I haven't seen him for a few days. It turns out, the murderer went too far. He's so cruel. He's a good kid. The last time I saw him he wanted me to take him fishing. Yeah, he's a kind kid. He often came to help me with things and tutored my son. What a pity. It's too much. Who killed him? Poor little Kudo. Daybreak and Dawn walked forward in a daze, lost. Come in. A clear, flat, and emotionless voice suddenly rang out beside the two of them. The voice was very soft, but it struck their hearts in an instant. Daybreak and Dawn were shocked. They looked at each other and saw the despair in each other's eyes. They knew that the young master had been killed. Although this was definitely bad news, the two of them still had some hope in their hearts. But now, their hope was completely shattered with a simple word from His Highness. If there really was hope, His Highness wouldn't be here at this moment. This could only mean that there was no turning back. The two pushed through the crowd in front of them and strode into the courtyard. There were very few people in the courtyard. A few men and women dressed like ordinary fishermen but with different temperaments were kneeling in the corner of the courtyard. Their faces were ashen and they were motionless as if they had lost their souls. A middle-aged man, who looked to be in his 40s or 50s, was standing in the middle of the yard calmly. He had a thin, ordinary body and an unremarkable appearance. He stood there expressionlessly with his back to Dawn and Daybreak. He was calm but exuded an indescribable sense of oppression and danger. It was an indescribable feeling. The whole yard, the whole fishing village, and even the whole world became illusory around the man. The tall and cold woman standing beside the man, and even Daybreak and Dawn themselves became meaningless background. Only the seemingly ordinary man existed with the most real feeling. He was motionless, but once he moved, it seemed that the whole world around him would be broken into ashes with his outburst. Behind this dazed and oppressive environment, both Daybreak and Dawn felt an extreme rage and killing intent. Your Highness. Daybreak and Dawn stood behind the man and bowed, trying their best to keep calm. The man said nothing and didn't move like a statue. Dawn subconsciously looked at the woman standing beside the man. It was a woman in her 30s. She was elegant, delicate, arrogant, and mature. She was a very attractive woman, like a thorny rose, delicate and beautiful, but also very dangerous. However, at this moment, standing next to the man, her elegance dimmed like never before. At this moment she was like a lifeless sculpture, and only the man beside her was the most real person. Her code name was Phoenix. In their organization, she was a master whose position was no less than Daybreak and Daybreak's. Phoenix seemed to feel Dawn's gaze, but she didn't dare to move. She just turned the corner of her eyes and signaled them to look forward. Daybreak and Dawn moved to the left and right respectively. They looked past the man in front of them and their faces suddenly changed. A small piece of white cloth was spread out in front of the man. The white cloth was stained with dried and somewhat black blood. A palm that seemed to be maintaining a hand seal was placed on the white cloth. Other than that, there was only a pile of ashes mixed with gravel, as well as some minced meat and broken bones. This was their young master. Daybreak and Dawn's eyes became extremely cold in an instant. Intense anger and killing intent burst out from them in an instant. Smashing bones and scattering ashes. They thought of this word immediately, but their eyes fell on the palm that was still making a seal. What did he want to express by leaving this palm? Was it a provocation? Daybreak's body slightly trembled uncontrollably. He suddenly reached out his hand, and a middle-aged man who was kneeling in the corner flew over uncontrollably and was caught by Daybreak. What's going on? Daybreak's voice was as cold as the chilly wind blowing in the hell. I don't know. The morning before yesterday, young master was killed on his way to school and didn't come back that day. We searched for a long time before we found young master's remains under the cliff of Wuxia Mountain. The man caught by Daybreak was an expert who was infinitely close to the thunder-shocking realm. He was also one of the hidden pawns they left in the village to accompany young master. But at this time, this person's face was completely pale, and there was only despair in his eyes. It was self-evident what young master meant to their organization. He was the son of His Highness, a real genius. Although he didn't have fancy things like wind and thunder veins and heavenly king heart and exquisite bone, his real combat capability was unparalleled. As a 10-year-old thunder-shocking realm expert, as long as he was given time, he would definitely enter the invincible realm as soon as he was 30 years old. He was the real heavenly son, destined to sweep the dark world in the future. But now, such a person who was regarded as the biggest hope by His Highness and the entire organization, was killed. As guardians, they couldn't absolve themselves from the blame. Who did it? Standing in front of his son's remains, the mysterious Highness finally spoke. His voice was still calm, without any extra emotion. The extreme calmness was in itself a kind of complete madness. There was silence. No one could answer this question. After a long time, Daybreak smiled bitterly and said, "Now we can't even find the suspect. Maybe it's the dark forces that entered Changdao recently, and Zhongzhou State." The expert who was grabbed by Breaking Dawn said with a fierce gaze. Daybreak glanced at him coldly and didn't even bother to say a word. Young master had been secretly taught by His Highness since he was a child. After he was left to live in this mountain village, Daybreak, Dawn, Phoenix, and the others would come to give him advice from time to time. No one knew more than them how terrifying young master was. A 17-year-old thunder-shocking realm expert represented not only the terrifying and desperate potential in the future, but also the extremely violent combat capability. Many people thought that Daybreak was the strongest expert in the organization except for His Highness. It might not be wrong, but Daybreak was sure that if he fought desperately, he might be able to seriously injure young master, but he would be the one who would die in the end. Even if he and Dawn joined hands, young master couldn't defeat him and wanted to run away, and they couldn't stop him. In other words, in the entire dark world, no one under the invincible realm could kill young master. Under such circumstances, young master was turned into ashes. Which invincible realm expert did it? Even if Shinichi Miyamoto did it himself, he couldn't kill young master without making a sound. The mysterious Highness squatted down slowly. He picked up his son's palm, which was still in the gesture of making a handprint. His eyes were complicated and sad. He put the palm in front of his mouth and kissed it. Then he said blandly, "Investigate. Investigate any expert who entered Ninghu in the past week, including those above the fire-flaming realm. Phoenix, you do this. You don't have to go to Changdao anymore." Phoenix froze, then nodded and said, "Yes." The man stayed silent for a long time, then carefully put away all the ashes, broken bones and minced flesh on the gravel. His expression was calm, but his fingertips were shaking uncontrollably. Turned into ashes. In the broken bones and minced flesh, he felt heartache, and he also felt the murderer's extreme resentment and hatred towards him in all of them. Who on earth had such a deep hatred towards him? And how could the murderer be so resourceful as to find his son? The man's movements were very slow. He slowly collected all the remains into a jar. He held the jar for a long time before sighing softly and muttering to himself, "I've endured for so many years, but what have I gotten in return?" Daybreak and Dawn's facial muscles twitched at the same time. The death of young master was more than just a simple matter of His Highness sending off his son. The plan of their whole organization for so many years completely failed with this murder. It was hard for people who weren't in the game to understand how cruel this move was. "I'll ask Dawn to send you home." The man stroked the jar in his hand and finally gave the urn to Dawn. He said blandly, "After things in Changdao are over, you will send Huawu home in person." Kudu was a fake, of course. But Huawu was his real name. Dawn took the jar with trembling hands, but he couldn't stop his tears from flowing. He knew what it meant to go home. His real home, of course, wasn't in East Island. But if it wasn't in East Island, where could it be? "Yes." Dawn answered in a hoarse voice, and his voice was as shrill as a ghost's. Let's change the plan of Changdao. The man closed his eyes and opened them after a long time. His tone had become cold and flat again. Originally. Ha! He paused, shook his head in self-mockery and continued, protect Li Tianlan with all your strength at all costs. Yes. Daybreak and dawn set at the same time. The man slowly walked out of the courtyard. There were still a lot of villagers wandering outside the courtyard. Seeing the man come out and he didn't do anything, all the villagers involuntarily made way for him. The man walked calmly, but his steps were slow and heavy. The whole village seemed to be trembling under his footsteps. Who do you think it is? He walked slowly and suddenly asked. I don't know. Daybreak shook his head. The identity of the young master was a secret even in the organization. Under normal circumstances, no matter how advanced the murderer's intelligence system was, he shouldn't have found this place. But their intelligence collection is obviously immature. Dawn held the jar and said slowly, although they found the young master they didn't find. Shut up. Before he could finish his words, Daybreak had already interrupted him severely with a stern look in his eyes. The man in front of him didn't say a word, walked through the alley very slowly, and walked out of the village in the rain. Crack. Woo-woo. Behind him, the shrill sound of thunder suddenly rang out the moment the man stepped out of the village. The loud sound appeared and disappeared in an instant. Above the village, the air within a radius of hundreds of meters suddenly twisted violently. In the twisted air, the clouds above seemed to be torn apart in a trance. The air kept squeezing and shaking, becoming fragmented. The fragmented space kept reflecting light, and the light became colorful in the messy reflection. The man had walked out of the village. As he stepped down, the extremely fragmented and twisted space suddenly shone brightly. There seemed to be a rainbow in the village, going straight into the sky from the entrance of the village. The light was gorgeous and cold. In silence, the whole village was twisted and broken. All the buildings and all the villagers were flattened and dissipated in the incredible power. The rain was falling. The man kept walking. From the beginning to the end, no matter he, dawn, daybreak or phoenix, none of them looked back. Chapter 219. In less than 24 hours, the whole of Changdao went from being extremely quiet to extremely active, and it directly became a whirlpool that could swallow everything. The general trend was booming. All the superpowers participated in it, either actively or passively. The battlefield of Changdao was stained with blood, and the killing didn't stop. On the huge battlefield with a radius of 100 miles, the elites of the dark superpowers encountered each other intentionally or unintentionally, and then they attacked each other without hesitation. This was a war without a target, or in other words, the target was too big. After all, East Island was small, but it was powerful. At least in Asia, it might not be as powerful as Zhongzhou State, but it was far more powerful than other countries. It was world-class in many fields, especially in the dark world. The warrior spirit that East Island advocated made it particularly powerful in the dark world. In such a small place, there were 3 superiors of the invincible realm. Counting the 2 superiors of Night Spirit who had died, there were 5 superiors of the invincible realm. This alone showed how powerful the special warfare system of East Island was. And this time, the ultimate goal of all the superpowers was the right to speak of the special warfare system of East Island. This was a power that couldn't be shared. So they had to force East Island to compromise, but they were also mortal enemies with each other. No one was willing to give up the interests of the special warfare system of a country. So from the beginning of the Battle of Changdao, this place was destined to be a bloodbath, and it would become the biggest meat grinder in the dark world in recent years. Any superpower that was qualified to participate in the game couldn't get out unscathed. This was a battle of life and death. But before the final battle, at least for the dark superpowers, they barely had a common enemy. So when the final battle broke out, it was reasonable for the superpowers to split up and join forces in the battle. When the morning sun crossed the sky and the scorching sun was about to fall in the west, in the residential area on the edge of the battlefield of Changdao that was about to be demolished, the leaders of the dark superpowers in East Island gathered together again. It was still the same dilapidated hall. The dirty curtains covered the red setting sun outside the window, and the room was dark. A few ghost-like shadows stood quietly in every corner as if they had never moved. The LCD screen that occupied an entire wall had been turned on, and one image after another was flashing on the screen. Dazzling light emitted from the screen, illuminating the faces of several people in the room. The person closest to the screen was still the first vice president of the Heroes Club, Ben. He held a small and delicate remote control in his hand and froze the flickering picture on the screen. The image froze for a moment, then continued to play. Although the image was no longer flashing, it was still moving. On the screen, a group of white people dressed in different clothes were fighting fiercely. Both sides of the battle wore different emblems on their chests and sleeves, proving that they belonged to two different forces. A live broadcast. Ben's skeleton-like thin figure moved. He whistled, and an old and gloomy voice came from the black robe that wrapped around his body. He laughed grimly and said, "The lads of the Polar Ground Alliance and the Holy Sanctum are too energetic. Oh, another one has fallen. Ah, another one. Wonderful, truly wonderful." Two cold snorts sounded at the same time. In the dark environment, not far behind Ben, a figure that was as strong as a giant moved, and the awe-inspiring murderous aura condensed and spread, but it wasn't aimed at Ben, but at another figure in the dark. In the dark, there was a dazzling, almost holy white figure with blonde hair and white clothes. Even in the dark, there was a kind of dignity and purity that couldn't be profaned. "Holy light, control your bastards. Don't think that you're invincible just because someone is standing up for the Holy Sanctum. No matter how strong the master behind you is, he can't radiate his power to Changdao." In the dark, the voice of the strong figure that was full of great power was cold and thick, with undisguised murderous intent and threat. "Ha! Holy Light," the vice-commander of the Knights Templars, chuckled and said coldly, "The Holy Sanctum doesn't need other people to stand up for us against the Polar Ground Alliance. King Bear, do you want to fight with me? Sooner or later." King Bear laughed grimly, "Right in Changdao, I'll tear you apart myself. You two, you're not enemies." Ben suddenly spoke, his voice getting older and hoarser, with an indescribable mystery, "At least not now. We now have two most important targets. The first is East Island, and the second is Zhongzhou State. Compared with them, each of us is weak. If they don't die, do we need to have internal strife?" I agree with Ben's words. Now it seems that our biggest opponents are East Island and Zhongzhou State. After we destroy them, it's time for us to fight. King Bear, Holy Light, you need to restrain your subordinates. Crow of Fantasy World said in a gloomy tone. King Bear and Holy Light looked at each other and kept silent in the cold murderous intent. "If you all can calm down, then I can tell you a piece of news." Li Tianlan showed up. Ben stared at the big screen in front of him and said slowly. No one said anything. Li Tianlan showed up. They weren't fools, so they naturally knew it. Wasn't it nonsense to say it now? The power of the Polar Ground Alliance in East Island isn't as strong as the Heroes Club, but we can still get this kind of news. King Bear said impatiently, "Ben, what the hell do you want to say? I know you have your own intelligence channels. But do you know where Li Tianlan showed up last time?" Ben sneered, pointed at the big screen, and said in a complicated tone, "The place where Li Tianlan showed up last time is less than 2,000 meters away from here." The hall suddenly went quiet. This was indeed an unexpected news. The elites of Zhongzhou State were hiding in a luxury club in the middle of the battlefield, but this was already the edge of the battlefield. The elites of East Island were besieging Li Tianlan. Why didn't Li Tianlan retreat to his own base camp? Why did he come here? Who here wasn't shrewd? Even the rash and impulsive Bear King was a character who had experienced many storms in the past. A simple piece of news, but it made them clearly smell a trace of a conspiracy. Li Tianlan naturally doesn't want to come here, but his retreat has been cut off by the elites of East Island. In other words, now he is farther and farther away from the people of Zhongzhou State, but closer and closer to us. It's very interesting, isn't it? Ben smiled softly, but his voice was a little cold. Obviously, our hiding place has long been exposed. East Island wants to use Li Tianlan to lead us into the trap in advance. We can intervene in the battlefield, but I hope some people can calm down. Holy Light's eyes suddenly burst out a sharp light. Among the several dark forces present, only Knights Templars and the Jiang family of South America were most interested in Li Tianlan, especially Knights Templars. They received the order from the Vatican, or in other words, they followed the will of His Majesty the Pope, so they were determined to get Li Tianlan. Now Li Tianlan seemed to be far away from them, which made Holy Light a little excited. But Ben's words made him calm down quickly. Li Tianlan was one of the key figures in the final battle. Zhongzhou State wanted to protect him, East Island wanted to catch him, and the Jiang family of South America and Knights Templars also wanted to take him over. But now the final battle had just begun. If they caught Li Tianlan now, it would definitely lead to the joint attack of the two strongest forces, East Island and Zhongzhou State, and it would also destroy the tacit understanding between Knights Templars and the Jiang family of South America. Li Tianlan naturally had to be caught, but it also had to be at the right time. Now it seemed that it was still too early. I know what to do. Holy Light said blandly, I will put Li Tianlan's matter aside, but I also hope some people can restrain themselves. His eyes turned and fell on another person in the corner. That was a woman shrouded in darkness. In the absence of the third master of the Jiang family, the killer of the invincible realm in the dark world, evil, she was the representative of the Jiang family of South America. The woman in the dark chuckled and didn't say much. It's good that you can have a clear judgment. Ben turned around slowly and said softly, since the final battle has begun, of course, we have to join the battle. 10 minutes ago, I decided that all the elites of the Heroes Club will enter the battlefield together. The first target is the elites of East Island, and the second is the elites of Zhongzhou State. In the current situation, only by killing them can we qualify for the final battle. I hope that the final battle in Changdao will be between us. Before that, I hope that our alliance is unbreakable. Holy Light hesitated and nodded, saying, I agree with this plan. Agree. Crow's hoarse and unpleasant voice rang out. I have no opinion. King Bear still looked at Holy Light with an unruly face. What about the cooperation outside of Changdao? In the dark, the voice of the woman who represented the Jiang family of South America rang out lightly and charmingly. No one spoke. Everyone's eyes were on Holy Light. The cooperation outside of Changdao was naturally to plot against Zhongzhou State. But Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhongzhou State was still in Zhongzhou State. If they wanted to keep the cooperation smooth, they must have the power to stop Wang Tianzong. The cooperation remains the same. Holy Light said slowly, His Highness has set off from the headquarters of the Vatican. He will arrive at the border between Zhongzhou State and Annan State in 12 hours. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Ben smiled and said slowly, Then I wish us a happy cooperation. The woman who represented the Jiang family of South America chuckled and slowly disappeared. Without a sound, Crow also disappeared in the hall. The screen on the wall gradually dimmed. The whole hall returned to the most quiet and oppressive state again. The final battle of Changdao had begun. Similarly, a storm was about to rise at the border of Zhongzhou State. The general trend swept the dark world. After Changdao, Northern Europe, and North America, the fourth battlefield was about to appear. In the gradually darkening night, a black luxury car slowly drove into Changdao from Ninghu. The night was dark. Qin Weibai, who came to Changdao quietly and then went to Ninghu and finally returned to Changdao, sat quietly in the back of the car, looking at the dim light outside the window indifferently. The dim yellow light shone on a small corner in the back of the car. Qin Weibai sat in the corner shrouded by the light, looking more and more dreamy and ethereal. Boss Tianlan's whereabouts were exposed during the investigation, and he is now being encircled. Zhongzhou State has begun to send people to rescue him. Duke, Flaming Fire, and Horsewoman are also on the move, but they haven't found Tianlan yet. In the passenger seat, Saint answered a phone call and slowly reported. Qin Weibai's delicate body seemed to tighten for a moment, and then she slowly relaxed and said, How long has it been? Nearly 20 hours. Saint's tone was still calm. Sunset Shadow tried to cover Tianlan's death. The last news we got was that Tianlan and the others had been separated, and they were all on the run. Qin Weibai's delicate eyebrows slightly frowned. After a moment of silence, she slowly said, Saint, you go to Tianlan yourself. Besides, have you locked on to her position? After she separated from Tianlan, she seemed to want to run back and she seemed to be hurt. Military counselor, who drove in person, took the initiative to say, Let's go see her. Qin Weibai's eyes flashed with complexity, and she finally said softly. Military counselor responded, and then the car fell into silence again. Aren't you going to ask me anything? In the silence, Qin Weibai broke the silence and suddenly asked, Boss, if you want to say something you will tell us. If you don't want to say it, it doesn't matter. Saint seemed to know what Qin Weibai meant. He smiled and said, I know there must be an earth-shattering big shot behind that child. Otherwise, no matter how talented he is, he won't be so horrible. But, it doesn't matter. Anyway, he is dead. We did this with the Wang family of Beihai. Even if someone comes for revenge in the future, so what? Qin Weibai looked out of the window in silence. After a long time she sighed and said, His name is Cutting Huawu. He was a figure who could leave a glorious mark in the dark world, but now he is dead. What a pity. Her tone was cold and she said it was a pity, but her eyes were clear without a trace of guilt. The most infatuated person was the most ruthless. In this world, in this era, she might feel sorry for many people, but as long as she was worthy of him, that was enough. What did the life and death of others have to do with her? If she owed someone, she owed someone. Moreover, in the grand scheme of things, could it really be so clear who owed who? A long time ago she had made up her mind that in this life, even if she had to break her bones and give up everything. Chapter 220. The black limousine drove into downtown Changdao without any disguise and passed through the battlefield. At the edge of the battlefield, a large number of East Island troops were gathering. Soldiers in all kinds of military uniforms were scattered at the edge of the battlefield, and all kinds of heavy weapons were placed in the most conspicuous places. Changdao wasn't big, but it was still huge compared to an individual. In just a few days, East Island transferred troops from all over to Changdao, and the number of troops around the edge of the battlefield was close to 100,000. With 100,000 people, it seemed unrealistic to surround a battlefield with a radius of 100 miles. But with all kinds of heavy firepower weapons and satellite monitoring, East Island was sure that they could hit any corner of the battlefield. The black limousine passed the checkpoint set by the East Island Army, but the guards here didn't even bother to look at it and let it go. Within 7 days, people were allowed to enter this place, but no one was allowed to leave. East Island wouldn't stop anyone who wanted to join this battlefield. The Dark World had its own rules. East Island also had its own rules. All the dark superpowers attacked East Island together, and East Island also drew a large enough battlefield, so they had to follow the rules in the place of the final battle. The 100,000 troops that East Island scattered at the edge of the battlefield could be said to be a deterrent, but more importantly, it was intercepting and protecting the outside of the battlefield from damage. The battlefield with a radius of 100 miles was big enough, and it wasn't a limit for all the superpowers. In this area, it didn't matter if they fought fiercely. No matter who won or lost in the end, the East Island Army wouldn't intervene, because this was a conflict within the scope of the Dark World. But in a big enough battlefield, if someone wanted to rush out and destroy East Island on purpose, he would be an invader, and East Island had every reason and ability to destroy any superpower. That was the rule. Today's final battle was like a vendetta in Jianghu. The authorities would pay attention to it, but they couldn't intervene. Even if East Island was wiped out in this final battle, they could only endure it. Once East Island dared to use the army to break the rule, what awaited East Island was a war. A real war. No one wanted to escalate the situation to such a serious extent. East Island didn't dare, Zhongzhou State didn't want to, and other superpowers didn't want to either. Keeping everything within the scope of the conflict in the Dark World, and winning or losing they could still get the benefits they wanted, but it wouldn't cause catastrophic consequences. That was what everyone wanted to see. The black limousine rushed into the demolition area at the edge of the battlefield. On the passenger seat, Saint's figure slowly disappeared. Up to now, Zhongzhou State and Samsara had not found Li Tianlan, which could only mean that he was in the enemy-occupied area of the battlefield outside the radiation range of Zhongzhou State. If they searched from here, the probability of finding him was relatively higher. Military counselor continued to drive. In the back of the car, Qin Weibai remained calm and collected, but her pair of snow-white slender hands were tightly clenched into fists. "Where is she?" Qin Weibai asked softly. The military advisor who was driving took out a screen and looked at it before replying, "From here. Less than 20 kilometers away. Night has locked onto her position and is following her in secret." 20 kilometers. Qin Weibai's bright eyes flickered, and her whole person exuded a kind of enchanting and holy charm. The military counselor remained silent. This distance was indeed beyond his expectation. This place was close to the edge of the battlefield, completely outside the sphere of influence of Zhongzhou State. At first, according to Horsewoman, the other party should be fleeing back, but now it was 20 kilometers away from the edge of the battlefield. Obviously, after fleeing back for a distance, the other party turned back and went straight into the enemy-occupied area. "She's looking for Tianlan." Qin Weibai suddenly sneered. "She really doesn't give up. Hurry up, I want to see her right away." Military counselor answered and stepped on the accelerator. As the car accelerated, he hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help but ask, "Do you really want to see her?" Since killing Cutting Huawu, military counselor had felt that something was wrong. Although he didn't know what exactly was going on, he had some guesses from some clues. At this time, if the boss went to see her, there might be a risk of exposure. I have to go. Qin Weibai's voice was soft and firm. She's like a bomb around Tianlan. I must help him dismantle it. Kill her? Military counselor's eyes suddenly turned cold. You can't kill her. Qin Weibai shook her head and said no more. Military counselor didn't ask any more, but he drove faster and faster. The car rushed out of the demolition area, and the trees on the road were moving backward quickly. The night outside the window was quiet. Qin Weibai looked at the night sky through the window and said to herself coldly, years of hard work just to make a wedding dress. Even if I give you a good death, so what? Sneaking, searching, observing. The quiet night shrouded the whole dense forest. Dongqing Rushi looked calm and cautious, walking carefully in the forest. The final battle had broken out. But this place was behind the enemy, and it hadn't been covered by the fire of war yet. But the density of patrols in the whole area gradually increased. Dongqing Rushi's face was pale. She avoided the patrols of East Island and searched carefully. She never thought about going back. That night, as Sunset Shadow and the Big Dipper died together, and as Wind Ghost died, only 2 of the 7 Thundershocking Realm experts who chased them survived. They desperately rushed out of the encirclement, but in the chaos, they were completely scattered by the furious elites of East Island. Dongqing Rushi fled alone in the battlefield, trying her best to get rid of the East Island experts who were chasing her, and then began to return without hesitation. Along the way he had been hiding not only from the elites of East Island, but also from the elites of Zhongzhou State. They were all in his hiding range. She went deep into the enemy's rear alone. Dongqing Rushi's clear eyes became more and more alert. Her whole body was tense and she was ready to attack and escape with all her strength. It was stuffy in the quiet forest. Dongqing Rushi, who was almost soaked in sweat, sat behind a big tree, exhausted. She silently ate the compressed biscuit in her hand, looking calm. In the quiet forest, there was a slight sound of wind. The soft footsteps passed into Dongqing Rushi's ears with the dull wind. In an instant, Dongqing Rushi, who was tense all over, directly bounced up from the ground, turned around, and stared in the direction of the footsteps. There were no stars and no moon in the sky tonight. In the dim light, a tall and slender figure walked toward her alone, casually. She was wearing white clothes and a white skirt, and she was peerless. That was a kind of unparalleled charm that could almost make all women feel ashamed of themselves. It was illusory, as if she didn't belong to the mortal world, so perfect that it was like a dream. Dongqing Rushi didn't feel the danger, but out of instinct she suddenly took a few steps back. The white figure approached her unhurriedly. In the extremely low visibility, Dongqing Rushi finally saw the other's face. Her face was perfect, delicate and sharp like that of a fairy. I'm Qin Weibai. The white figure looked at Dongqing Rushi and said in a calm tone, sit. Dongqing Rushi didn't speak, nor did she sit down. The silent sword was behind her, but she held a red dagger tightly in her hand, and the faint killing intent surged in her body. At this moment, Dongqing Rushi was sure that there were only 2 people near this forest. One was herself. The other was this extraordinary woman in the dark world who didn't know martial arts. Facing the faint fluctuating killing intent, Qin Weibai didn't seem nervous at all. Her bright eyes quietly glanced at the dagger in Dongqing Rushi's hand. She chuckled, but her tone was a little complicated. Missing and forgetting each other? It's really a story of entanglement. Dongqing Rushi's pupils suddenly contracted, and the light in her eyes changed. The pure color flickered and it seemed to fade away. Stop pretending. Qin Weibai said indifferently, you're not Dongqing Rushi. If you were her, you wouldn't be nervous facing me. Even if you were nervous, you wouldn't hold this acacia. Silence is her weapon and you are her second personality? You know me well? Dongqing Rushi's eyes suddenly changed. The purity faded away and it became melancholy, indifference and coldness. What do you want? Dongqing Yueshan asked. For nearly 100 years in Zhongzhou State. Do you know which family is the most pitiful and pathetic? Qin Weibai didn't answer Dongqing Yueshan, but asked in a very soft tone. The soft tone seemed to come from the sky, and it lingered, with a dreamy feeling like the sounds of nature. Dongqing Yueshan's eyes were in a trance, and then they became cold again. It's not the Li family. Qin Weibai answered her own question, it's the Dongqing clan. Dongqing Yueshan still didn't say a word. Do you know Dongqing Huangtu? Qin Weibai asked indifferently. Dongqing Yueshan's eyes suddenly became colder. You know a lot. In the silence, Dongqing Yueshan finally opened her mouth and sneered slightly. But you shouldn't have appeared in front of me alone. I'm not Rushi, I'm Dongqing Yueshan. Boss Qin, are you warning me about something by appearing in front of me? Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you? Kill me? Qin Weibai laughed. Her laughter was cold and sweet, echoing in the forest like a fairy. What a coincidence. There was once someone who wanted to kill me. Her name was Li Yueshan. Crack. Dongqing Yueshan suddenly took a step forward and lovesickness was unsheathed. She looked at Qin Weibai coldly, and her eyes were hesitant. I know what you want to do. In other words, I know you better than you know yourself. Since you said it's a warning, then it's a warning. Qin Weibai's voice gradually became cold. I really hate you like this. But I like Rushi very much. So, from now on, I don't want to see you again. Do you understand? How can you do that? Dongqing Yueshan was furious. Because I'm Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai slowly turned around and left the forest. If you dare to disobey me, you might as well continue your plan. If you really drive me crazy, you will bear the consequences. I promise you will regret it. She stepped forward. At that moment, Dongqing Yueshan was about to make a move. Clatter. A dull sound suddenly rang out, but it sounded like thunder in Dongqing Yueshan's ears. In her sight, Qin Weibai's footsteps had landed. But another footstep sounded in the void after her footsteps landed, and it coincided with her footsteps. Dongqing Yueshan's face changed dramatically, and she stared at the surroundings of Qin Weibai. At this moment, she realized that the reason why Qin Weibai dared to come over was that she was not alone at all. There was another superior hiding in the void, following her all the time. A superior that she didn't even notice. Saint couldn't do that, and neither could military counselor. The master of Samsara Palace. It could only be the master of Samsara Palace. Dongqing Yueshan suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. Qin Weibai's figure slowly disappeared in the night. Dongqing Yueshan stood where she was quietly. In front of her, the void suddenly began to twist. In her sight, the space in front of her was twisting and shaking. Two beautiful words gradually formed in the void and then became stable. Words were carved in the void. This was the real means of the invincible realm. Dongqing Yueshan stared at the two words, and the expression on her beautiful face kept changing, uncertain. That was the two words that everyone could recognize. But maybe only she understood what it meant. Chapter 221. In the hot and depressing night, Dongqing Rushi began to return, but Li Tianlan was moving forward. He had no choice but to move forward. The fierce fighting had lasted for a day and a night. Li Tianlan himself couldn't tell when he was separated from the others. The village in the number 3 defensive zone was like a hornet's nest. It was not until the real encirclement began that Li Tianlan realized that Jifeng Sword Raining School was not the only force stationed there. After the death of the Big Dipper and Wind Ghost, they broke out of the encirclement almost immediately. But before they rushed out of the forest, the elites of East Island from all directions had already surrounded them. The elites of the village behind the forest also moved out in large numbers. At least 1,000 people were like a torrent, instantly drowning them. There was only killing left. There was only fighting left. There were enemies in all directions and all of them were full of killing intent. Ice and fire roared, thunder flashed, airflow surged and gunshots roared. Li Tianlan could only rush in the predetermined direction with all his strength. From night to day until the moonlight faded and the sun rose, Li Tianlan found that he had lost contact with the people around him. Sunset Shadow died. Deep Dream disappeared. Dongqing Rushi disappeared. Du Hanin also disappeared. After he rushed out of one encirclement, he seemed to step into another one. The way back had been completely blocked. Under the almost carpet search of East Island elites, Li Tianlan could only flee in the opposite direction. One day and one night. In the quiet time near the end of the 4th day, Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood, was silently treating his wounds. A lot of blood had dried up on him and some of it was still flowing. Some of the blood belonged to him but most of it belonged to others. Looking from a distance, Li Tianlan was completely covered in blood now. He threw his torn shirt aside. On his back, there was a knife wound so deep that the bone could be seen, as if it was directly carved there, and blood was flowing. The sword wound was nearly 30 centimeters long, and a lot of blood gushed out of the wound. Li Tianlan tore off a piece of bark and bit it in his mouth. His whole body shook. A layer of fire burned directly on his back. The condensed fire spread along his back and quickly covered the whole wound. Humph! Li Tianlan bit the bark hard. Under the sharp pain, his face suddenly became distorted and pale, but his eyes were full of indifference and chilling tranquility. The wounds and large pieces of flesh were burnt by the fire and barely healed together. Li Tianlan's expression was cold, and the flames on his fingertips rose again. His chest, abdomen, arms, thighs and some relatively shallow wounds were all burnt little by himself. Cold sweat kept flowing down his forehead. Li Tianlan, whose whole body seemed to emit a burnt smell, had a twisted face, but his calm eyes gradually revealed a kind of crazy chill. The flame wiped the last wound on his body. Li Tianlan, who was on the verge of collapse, moved his body and leaned against the tree behind him. He took out the almost bitten-through piece of bark from his mouth and ate it without looking at it. Only one day had passed. But Li Tianlan was completely different. For nearly a day and a night, East Island obviously regarded him as the main target of encirclement and suppression. After they blocked his retreat route intentionally or unintentionally, the lineup they sent after him was also suffocatingly luxurious. At first, hundreds of people chased after him non-stop, and then 2 Thundershocking Realm experts joined the team. In less than 6 hours, the Thundershocking Realm experts increased from 2 to 4. Then the half-step Invincible Realm experts showed up in person. The mighty chase of hundreds of people finally dispersed. In the end, it turned into a hunting team led by 2 half-step Invincible Realm experts, 5 Thundershocking Realm experts, and almost 20 Fire-Flaming Realm experts. Such a lineup was just to chase after a young man. East Island had paid great attention to him. Li Tianlan himself didn't know how many people he had killed. Elites of the Qi-controlling realm and the ice-condensing realm died under the human emperor's hands one after another. He rushed from the forest to the highway, then into the mountains and finally into the forest. He fled all the way to the edge of the battlefield. And the strength of the people chasing him was getting stronger and stronger. This was totally the cruelest battle he had encountered since he came to East Island. He only remembered that he killed a Thundershocking Realm expert on the other side in the process of fleeing, and the horrible wound on his back was left at that time. The expert of the half-step Invincible Realm attacked in person. That saber and the sword light crisscrossed the forest, almost splitting his body in half. The crazy killing and fighting made him release his deliberately suppressed killing intent and fighting intent uncontrollably. In this state, Li Tianlan's every move carried a kind of sharpness and danger that couldn't be concealed. The high concentration of his willpower made his vigilance and fighting instinct rise to the limit. In the escape and fighting, his speed was getting faster and faster, and his attacks were getting fiercer and fiercer. The flying blood splashed in the screams. He seemed to gradually erase all the emotions except killing. It was like he was awakening or transforming. His willpower kept breaking the limit, and the imperfect heavenly king heart became more and more perfect. The unique technique of Zhuanyuantai focused on the state of mind. The 24 moves of sword, especially the most powerful moves of the absolute sword, demanded more willpower than anything else. In an almost hopeless environment, Li Tianlan saw an opportunity for himself to become stronger. Therefore, although he was fleeing, he did not retreat. Otherwise, in the process of this chase, Li Tianlan saw at least 2 opportunities for him to rush out. Although he wasn't absolutely sure, at least he could get closer to the elites of Zhongzhou state. But he kept going deep into the enemy's rear and quietly made an arc near the edge of the battlefield. He put himself at death's door. As for whether there would be a light at the end of the tunnel, he didn't even think about it. In the constant chasing and fighting, the desire for powerful strength became a little stronger and became an obsession. He almost instinctively pursued more powerful strength and a more perfect state of mind. This kind of obsession even went beyond life and death. Vaguely he felt oppressed or suppressed. It was as if there was an unknown power, or rather, a power that he had forgotten, that kept on suppressing his increasingly perfect martial will. It was like a shackle. Li Tianlan didn't know what it was. But as his willpower and concentration kept surpassing the peak, in the battle of life and death, the shackles that he ignored and forgot also began to disappear little by little and completely collapsed. It seemed to be right in front of him. Li Tianlan silently gnawed the bark in his hand. Without any replenishment, he sucked the bitter juice of the bark and swallowed the chewed wood. In a trance. He seemed to have returned to many years ago, to the era when he would rather gnaw the bark than drink the smelly porridge. The hard and resilient bark pierced the corner of his mouth. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm, but the corners of his mouth were bleeding, and he was grinning hideously. His aura, which was originally weak, continued to rise. Silent but hysterical madness with a sharp edge brewed and whistled from him, and finally became violent. At this moment, Li Tianlan was like a blazing sun. But it emitted a dark light. This bastard's speed is too fast. In the forest 1 kilometer away from Li Tianlan, a thunder-shocking realm expert in charge of chasing Li Tianlan was gnashing his teeth and cursing, but his footsteps did not stop at all. After nearly a day and a night of pursuit, it was not easy for the escapees, but it was also a kind of torture for the pursuers. In the hunting team, except for the 2 half-step invincible realm experts who looked normal, even several thunder-shocking realm experts, including the 2 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, were tired and pale, not to mention others. They poured sugary liquids into their mouths as they walked. 6 hours ago, the hunting squad had become scattered and disorganized. In the beginning, 2 half-step invincible realm experts led the team, 5 thunder-shocking realm experts were in the middle, and 18 fire-flaming realm experts were in the rear. But now, only 4 or 5 of the 18 fire-flaming realm experts could barely keep up, and the others had fallen far behind. The formation had been scattered, and the hunting team had become a real team. If it weren't for the saber strike that directly injured Li Tianlan not long ago, perhaps most of the members of the hunting team would have lost their confidence. There are 2 idioms in Zhongzhou State: an arrow at the end of its flight, or the last radiance of the setting sun. He can't hold on for long. Inform the nearby elites to outflank him from 4 directions. Let's take our time. Don't push him too hard and try to capture him alive. A man walking in the front spoke slowly. He was extremely short and had a baby face. At first glance he looked like a child of 14 or 15 years old. But the so-called child had an extremely fierce aura at this time, and the fierce aura made everyone subconsciously keep a distance from him. He walked alone in the front, like a flash of saber light in the dark. Fierce and dazzling. His code name was Dal. He was one of the deputy commanders of the Divine Wind Force. He was a veteran expert who had been famous for nearly 20 years, and also one of Shinichi Miyamoto's most trusted confidants. With his strength, he was naturally qualified to stay in the temporary headquarters in the mountain, but Shinichi Miyamoto put him outside. Obviously, he wanted him to be the most powerful executor. That little bastard, don't fall into my hands. A thunder-shocking realm expert muttered to himself, with resentment and anger in his eyes. What can I do if I fall into your hands? The baby smiled. There were even 2 deep dimples on his baby face which could hide his real age very well, and he looked a little cute. The thunder-shocking realm expert who spoke first paused and kept silent. He was also from the Divine Wind Force, and he had a high status in the Divine Wind Force. In his position he naturally knew some secrets, and he also knew the importance of Li Tianlan to East Island. This man, if they could capture him alive, they could never kill him. The best way to deal with him was to rope him in and ask him to surrender. It's said that His Majesty has said that if he catches Li Tianlan, as long as he is willing to surrender, he can choose any of the 2 unmarried royal princes, and they can even follow him. This is really... Another superior of the half-step invincible realm said thoughtfully and then shook his head. Everyone else was shocked at the same time. The Mikado had 3 daughters now. The eldest daughter, Princess Yukiko, was married, and the other 2 royal princes were still unmarried. They were a pair of world-famous beauties and many people were coveting them. In order to rope Li Tianlan in, the Mikado was willing to let the 2 royal princes follow him, which showed how important Li Tianlan was, but it also showed how embarrassed East Island was now. It's really funny. Baby Doll shook his head and gave his evaluation in a knowing manner. The other superior of the half-step invincible realm with the code name Thousand Face smiled and didn't say anything. He was a burly man who looked very handsome and majestic, but now he was willing to stand behind the baby. The difference in their strength was obvious. When the baby was about to continue talking, the phone suddenly rang. He frowned and picked up the phone. After listening to a few words, his face changed dramatically. The phone was hung up in a hurry. His baby face quickly became gloomy and he was silent. What's wrong? Thousand Face frowned and asked. Half an hour ago, Azure Dragon Gong Sun Chi raided our number 6 stronghold, and 80 elites were all killed. Besides, the Polar Ground Alliance and the Heroes Club joined the battle. The baby's tone was cold. Gong Sun Chi. Thousand Face was shocked. In the whole dark world, Azure Dragon Gong Sun Chi of Zhongzhou State seemed to be the first person under the invincible realm. Such a figure should have been the key force to change the situation in the final battle, but now he couldn't wait to take action when the final battle just broke out. Obviously they were equally determined to rescue Li Tianlan. Half an hour ago it was Gong Sun Chi. Now maybe Tribulation, Firmament and others had started to take action. The number 6 stronghold was not far from the village where Li Tianlan was ambushed at first. It wasn't a stronghold. Near the village, there were thousands of special warfare elites of East Island stationed. Thousand Faces' face changed in an instant. In order to rescue Li Tianlan, Zhongzhou State was going to rush directly through the area where they were stationed? Did they think it was the time of the final battle? This was definitely an accident. But there were more than one accident. The participation of the Polar Ground Alliance and the Heroes Club was also a huge variable. Thousand Faces' face was gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "What should we do? Let's go back and support them." They came to catch Li Tianlan for the victory of the final battle of Changdao. Now Zhongzhou State was attacking where they were, and even figures like Gong Sun Chi took action in person. If they didn't go back to support them, the consequences would be unpredictable. Besides, the Heroes Club and the Polar Ground Alliance were eyeing them covetously. It was impossible for them to help East Island at all. Instead, they would hit them when they were down. He and the Thousand-Faced Assassin were both half-step invincible realm experts. This was the power that was enough to change the situation of the battle. At this time it was not worth it to be dragged here by Li Tianlan. Moreover, the current Li Tianlan was not worthy of their efforts. Ice Bird, Black Shield, continue to chase after Li Tianlan. Ice Bird will take over the command of the nearby area and order the nearby elites to surround him. The rest of you follow me. Baby Doll said straightforwardly. He glanced at the depths of the forest with a hint of unwillingness in his eyes. He sneered regretfully and said, "Don't worry, he has been hit by my saber. He won't be able to hold on for long. Right now he's definitely not a match for any of you. After capturing him, immediately bring him back to the command center." Ice Bird understands. Among the 5 thunder-shocking realm experts, a beautiful and cold woman took a step forward and said in a deep voice. She and Black Shield were both experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Any one of them was enough to make Li Tianlan go all out in his heyday. Now that Li Tianlan was seriously injured and they had the cooperation of many nearby elites, catching Li Tianlan was a piece of cake. A hint of unwillingness flashed in Baby Doll's eyes again, but he did not dare to continue to delay. He and Thousand-Faced Assassin took the other 3 thunder-shocking realm experts and directly rushed back. Because she was too excited, Ice Bird's cold and beautiful face directly flushed, which was as delicate and beautiful as a flower. She naturally knew what Baby Doll was unwilling to accept. They had been chasing Li Tianlan for a day and a night, and none of them had given up. It was not because Li Tianlan was worthy of so many forces chasing after him, but because the credit for catching Li Tianlan was too great. Now, with the departure of Baby Doll and Thousand-Faced Assassin, the credit would fall on her. The figures of Baby Doll and Thousand-Faced Assassin disappeared at the end of her sight. Ice Bird took a deep breath and suddenly turned around. She glanced at Black Shield, who was silent, and said without hesitation, "Go." Less than a dozen meters behind Ice Bird and Black Shield, the void fluctuated imperceptibly. What an idiot. Evil, the only invincible realm killer in the dark world, sneered. Then he restrained all his aura and followed behind the two quietly. As an invincible realm expert, he could be said to be one of the first people to find Li Tianlan's traces. The two were even 20 meters away from each other when they were closest to each other. But Evil never made a move. He really did not lie to Shinichi Miyamoto. He did feel a kind of vague danger from Li Tianlan, the weak young heavenly son. This feeling was very strange, but it made him not dare to act rashly. Now Li Tianlan was seriously injured. It was good to let the two idiots in front of him test the water first. Evil's figure completely merged into the void. He held a ring-like emerald disc in his hand and was getting closer and closer to Li Tianlan. Under the tree hundreds of meters ahead. Li Tianlan swallowed the last piece of bark, and his calm eyes suddenly lit up. 2 footsteps were getting closer and closer to him. There were only 2 people. In the darkness, he held the human emperor and stood up calmly. The crazy killing intent instantly surged around him. When his willpower was absolutely concentrated, he once again felt the unknown shackles, and he also saw an opportunity. He raised his arm and the gun. Li Tianlan took a step forward in the direction where the pursuers were rushing from. It was a small step, but it was also a big step. With this step, Li Tianlan's aura suddenly soared from the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm to the peak. The 4th day was coming to an end. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.